Hello friends. Did you know nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy these stories, please hit that subscribe button and leave a like. It really helps. Thank you for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. The first rule of winter hauling across North Dakota is simple. Respect the whiteout. The second rule is just as clear. When I-94 closes, you don't argue. You find a place to wait it out, chain up if you're lucky enough to catch the warning early, or you pull into the nearest town and sit tight until the highway patrol gives the all clear. But there's a third rule, one nobody writes down, one you learn only after you've spent enough years behind the wheel in the upper Midwest. When the wind starts screaming across the prairie and the snow turns horizontal, you trust your gut more than your GPS, more than dispatch, more than the optimistic forecast some meteorologist read off a screen in Fargo. I'm Stellan Kirkeby. I've been running freight for 19 years, most of it across the northern tier states. I've hauled everything from refrigerated pharmaceutical loads to dry goods, from oversized machinery to time-sensitive auto parts. I know the difference between a system that'll dust the roads with an inch of powder and a prairie blizzard that'll bury your rig in under an hour. That February night in 2019, I thought I knew which one was coming. I was wrong. The load was standard, nothing unusual. 42,000 pounds of packaged consumer goods out of Bismarck, bound for Minneapolis. The route was I-94 East, the same corridor I'd driven hundreds of times. The weather report that morning called for light snow starting after sunset, accumulation of 2 to 4 inches, winds gusting to 25 miles per hour. Manageable. I'd run through worse. My dispatcher didn't flag any concerns, and the North Dakota DOT hadn't issued any travel alerts when I checked at 4 p.m. I fueled up, checked my airlines, did a full walk-around, and rolled out of the yard just before 5:30 p.m. The sun was already low. The sky that pale gray color that comes before snow. The temperature hovered around 14 degrees, cold enough to keep the pavement dry, cold enough that any moisture would freeze on contact. For the first hour, everything went exactly as expected. Traffic was light, mostly locals heading home from work, a few scattered big rigs like mine pushing east toward the Twin Cities. The snow started just past Steele, fine and powdery, the kind that blows across the highway in wispy curtains. My headlights cut through it easily and the road stayed black and visible. I kept my speed at 60, scanning the shoulders, watching for deer. The CB crackled occasionally with chatter from other drivers, nothing urgent, just the usual check-ins and banter. I had my thermos of coffee wedged into the cup holder, the heater set to a steady warmth, and Merle Haggard playing low on the stereo. It was the kind of night that lulls you into thinking winter driving is just about patience and preparation. Then, around mile marker 287, everything changed. The wind picked up in a way that felt personal, like something had been waiting for me to get far enough from town. It didn't build gradually, it just hit, a sustained howl that rocked my trailer and sent the snow swirling in every direction at once. Within seconds, the powder that had been drifting lazily across the asphalt turned into a solid wall of white. I couldn't see the road markings. I couldn't see the shoulder. I couldn't even see the hood of my own truck. I eased off the throttle, hands firm on the wheel, and tried to focus on the faint glow of the reflector posts, but even those were vanishing into the blur. This was a full whiteout, the kind where the horizon disappears and you lose all sense of depth and direction. I've heard drivers describe it as being inside a snow globe that someone won't stop shaking. That's close, but it doesn't capture the disorientation, the way your brain starts second-guessing whether you're still on pavement or drifting into the median. I hit my four-ways and slowed to 30, then 25. My trailer swayed slightly in the crosswind, not enough to jackknife, but enough to remind me that 70 feet of steel and cargo doesn't stop on a dime. The CB erupted with voices, all of them tense. Eastbound on 94, anyone got visual past 285? Negative, it's a wall out here. Diot's got plows staged, they're not moving yet. I-94 is about to close, if it hasn't already. I reached for my phone to check the highway status, but there was no signal. Out here, between towns, cell towers are sparse, and in weather like this, even the towers that exist might as well be decorative. I was on my own, relying on instinct and the faint hope that I'd see taillights ahead or catch a glimpse of the rumble strips before I drifted too far. The truck crept forward, and I counted seconds between breaths, trying to stay calm. That's when I felt it. A faint vibration through the steering wheel, the telltale judder of the rumble strip on the right shoulder. I corrected gently, easing back toward the center, and exhaled. At least I knew where the edge was, but knowing where the edge is doesn't help when you can't see what's ahead. The snow thickened and the wind gusted harder, strong enough that I could feel the whole rig shift slightly with each blast. I dropped to 15 miles per hour, then 10. At that speed, I wasn't making progress. I was just barely moving, trying not to become a stationary obstacle. The CB chatter had gone quiet, which was almost worse than the panicked voices. Silence meant either everyone had found shelter, or they were too focused on survival to talk. I was about to key the mic and ask for a status check when I saw them. Brake lights. 2 sets, maybe 3, glowing faint and red through the white. Relief washed over me. Other drivers, moving slow, probably doing the same thing I was. I eased closer, keeping a safe distance, using them as a reference point. Then the lights stopped moving. They didn't slow gradually, they just stopped, all at once, like someone had hit pause. I touched my brakes, felt the slight grab of the Jake, and brought the rig down to a crawl. The wind shrieked across the cab, and the snow swirled so thick I could barely make out the shapes ahead. I was maybe 50 feet back when I realized what I was looking at. It wasn't just 2 or 3 vehicles, it was a pile-up. The first truck had jackknifed across both lanes, its trailer angled like a wall. Behind it, a car had rear-ended the trailer's side, crumpling its hood into a mess of metal. Another semi had tried to stop and ended up halfway in the median, its tandems buried in snow. And there were more, shapes I couldn't fully see, scattered across the lanes like discarded toys. I stopped the rig, hands trembling slightly on the wheel, and sat there for a moment, processing. This wasn't a minor fender bender. This was a chain reaction, the kind of pileup that happens when visibility drops to 0 and momentum turns into a weapon. I grabbed my flashlight, zipped up my coat, and stepped down into the wind. The cold hit me like a fist, stealing my breath. Snow stung my face, and I had to squint just to see a few feet ahead. I kept one hand on the side of my truck as I moved forward, using it as a guide. The sound of the wind was overwhelming, a constant roar that drowned out everything else. As I reached the first wrecked semi, I saw movement. A figure emerged from the driver's side, stumbling slightly, hand pressed to his head. Blood seeped between his fingers, dark against the snow. I called out, but my voice was lost in the wind. I moved closer and he saw me, eyes wide and dazed. He tried to say something, but I couldn't hear him. I pointed back toward my truck and motioned for him to follow. He nodded, and we shuffled through the snow together, leaning into the gusts. I got him into my passenger seat, grabbed a first aid kit from behind the seat, and pressed a gauze pad to his forehead. He winced, but didn't pull away. "How many?" I shouted over the wind. He blinked, trying to focus. "How many vehicles?" He held up 4 fingers, then shook his head, uncertain. I nodded, and told him to stay put. I had to check the others. I stepped back out into the blizzard, moving carefully between the wreckage. The second semi was empty. Driver's door open. Snow already piling inside the cab. The car with the crumpled hood had a woman in the driver's seat. Conscious but shaken, I helped her out, guided her back to my truck, and told her to sit tight. The wind was relentless and the cold was starting to seep through my coat. My fingers were numb and my face felt raw. That's when I saw the third semi. It was angled across the median, half hidden by the snow, and something about it felt wrong. The trailer doors were slightly ajar, not wide open, just enough to let the wind rattle them. I approached slowly, flashlight cutting through the white. The air smelled wrong, a faint chemical tang that didn't belong in a blizzard. I pulled one of the doors open wider and shone the light inside. Wooden crates, unmarked, packed tight and secured with heavy straps. No logos, no shipping labels, nothing that indicated what they contained. Just plain wood and the smell of diesel and something else, something acrid and sharp. I stepped back, uneasy. This wasn't standard freight. Standard freight has paperwork, bills of lading, manifests. This looked like someone had gone out of their way to keep it anonymous. I closed the door and turned to head back to my truck when I heard a voice behind me, low and rough. "You didn't see that." I spun around, flashlight raised. A man stood a few feet away, barely visible through the snow. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a heavy coat and a cap pulled low. His face was shadowed, but I could see his eyes, cold and fixed on me. I recognized the look. It wasn't fear, it wasn't concern. It was a warning. "Just checking for injuries," I said, keeping my voice steady. He didn't move. "No injuries here. Move along." I nodded slowly, not breaking eye contact, and started to back away. He watched me the entire time, unmoving, a statue in the storm. I turned and walked quickly back to my truck, heart pounding. The injured driver and the woman were still inside, huddled together for warmth. I climbed in, shut the door, and locked it. The wind rocked the cab, and the snow piled against the windshield. I grabbed the CB mic, hands shaking, and keyed it. "Any state patrol on I-94 near mile 287? We've got a multi-vehicle pileup, injuries, need assistance." Static. Then a voice, faint and breaking up. "Copy that, eastbound. Units are staged waiting for visibility. Sit tight. Do not leave your vehicle." I set the mic down and stared out at the white void. The man was still out there, somewhere in the snow, guarding whatever was in that trailer. And I had just made myself a witness to something I wasn't supposed to see. The wind didn't let up. If anything, it got worse, hammering the side of my truck in waves that made the whole cab shudder. I sat there with the engine idling, the heater blasting, and two strangers pressed against me in a space meant for one. The injured driver had stopped bleeding, but his eyes were glazed, unfocused. The woman from the car kept glancing toward the windshield, watching the snow pile up against the glass like we were being buried alive. Nobody spoke. The only sounds were the howl of the blizzard outside and the steady rumble of the diesel engine beneath us. I kept my hand near the CB mic, waiting for another transmission from the state patrol, but all I got was static and the occasional fragment of a voice too broken to understand. The visibility was zero. I couldn't see the hood ornament on my own truck, let alone the wreckage scattered across the highway behind us. For all I knew, more vehicles were piling in, drivers thinking they could push through, not realizing they were driving straight into a wall of steel and snow. The thought made my stomach turn. I'd seen chain reaction pileups before, but never from the inside, never trapped in the middle with no way out and no idea how many more were coming. The woman finally broke the silence, her voice hoarse and shaky. How long do we wait? I didn't have an answer. The protocol was clear. Stay in your vehicle, keep warm, don't wander into the storm. But protocol assumed help was coming soon, that plows and troopers were already on their way. Out here in a full prairie blizzard soon could mean hours. It could mean morning. I'd heard stories of drivers found frozen in their cabs just a few hundred yards from a truck stop because they tried to walk for help and got turned around in the white. I wasn't about to let that happen. We stay put, I said, keeping my voice firm. Patrol knows we're here. They'll come when it's safe. The injured driver nodded slowly, but I could see doubt in his eyes. He knew, just like I did, that safe was a relative term in weather like this. I checked my fuel gauge, 3/4 full, enough to keep the engine running through the night if we needed it. The last thing I wanted was to shut down and lose heat. Hypothermia could set in fast, especially for the woman, who was dressed in nothing more than a thin jacket and jeans. I grabbed a blanket from the sleeper berth and draped it over her shoulders. She pulled it tight and whispered a quiet thank you. Then I heard it, a sound that cut through the wind, faint but unmistakable. Footsteps crunching in the snow, deliberate and slow, moving alongside my truck. I froze, one hand on the wheel, the other instinctively reaching for the door lock to make sure it was engaged. The woman noticed my reaction and tensed. "What is it?" she whispered. I held up a hand, signaling her to stay quiet. The footsteps stopped near the driver's side door, and for a moment there was nothing but the wind. Then came the knock. 3 solid raps against the metal, loud enough to make all of us jump. I cracked the window an inch, just enough to hear but not enough to let the cold flood in. "Yeah?" I called out, my voice sharper than I intended. A figure leaned close to the gap, face obscured by a scarf and the brim of a cap crusted with snow. It was the same man from before, the one who'd warned me away from the unmarked trailer. Up close, I could see his eyes, pale blue and unsettlingly calm, like the storm wasn't even touching him. "You called it in," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yeah," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "Multi-vehicle pileup, injuries, standard procedure." He nodded slowly, his breath misting in the freezing air. "Good, that's good. Just making sure we're all on the same page." There was something in the way he said it, a weight to the words that made it clear this wasn't about gratitude or coordination. This was about control, about making sure I understood my role in whatever was unfolding out there in the snow. I didn't respond, just stared back at him through the narrow gap. He seemed to take my silence as agreement, because he straightened up and stepped back. "Stay warm," he said, almost conversational. "Gonna be a long night." Then he was gone, swallowed by the white. I closed the window and sat back, heart pounding in my chest. The woman looked at me, eyes wide with fear. "Who was that?" I shook my head. "Don't know. Doesn't matter." But it did matter. It mattered a hell of a lot. That man wasn't just another stranded driver. He was watching, making sure I didn't step out of line, didn't ask the wrong questions or make the wrong call. And that meant whatever was in that trailer, it was worth protecting, worth threatening, worth making sure stayed buried under the snow and chaos. The minutes dragged on, each one feeling like an hour. I tried to keep my mind occupied, running through mental checklists, thinking about the route ahead, anything to avoid dwelling on the man outside and the cargo he was guarding. The injured driver had dozed off, his head leaning against the window, and the woman was quiet, staring at her hands. I envied them their ability to shut down, to let exhaustion take over. My mind wouldn't stop racing, turning over every detail, every word, every look. What was in those crates? Drugs? Weapons? Something worse? The CB crackled to life and I grabbed the mic before the voice even finished the first syllable. Eastbound on 94, this is North Dakota State Patrol. Plow crews are mobilizing. ETA 30 minutes. Repeat, 30 minutes. Stay in your vehicles. Do not attempt to clear wreckage. I keyed the mic and responded. Copy that, Patrol. Multiple injuries here at mile 287. 1 head trauma, 1 in shock. We're stable but need medical as soon as possible. The voice on the other end was professional. Clipped. Understood. Ambulance will follow the plows. Sit tight. The transmission ended, and I set the mic down, letting out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. 30 minutes, that was manageable. I could keep everyone warm for 30 minutes. I could keep my mouth shut for 30 minutes. But even as I thought it, I knew it wasn't that simple. The man outside wasn't going to just disappear when the plows arrived. He'd be there, blending in with the other drivers, making sure his cargo stayed intact and his secrets stayed buried. And if I said anything, if I so much as hinted at what I'd seen, he'd know. He'd make sure I regretted it. The woman stirred, pulling the blanket tighter. You think they'll really get here in 30 minutes? She asked, her voice small and uncertain. I nodded, more to reassure her than because I believed it. They will. Patrol doesn't make promises they can't keep. It was a lie, and we both knew it. Out here, in the kind of storm that could bury a semi in an hour, promises were just words. But sometimes words were all you had. The wind shifted, and I caught a glimpse of movement through the snow, shapes moving near the wrecked vehicles. At first, I thought it was the man again, making another round to ensure his dominance over the scene. But then I saw more figures, 3, maybe 4, moving with purpose, not the aimless wandering of stranded drivers. They were organized, coordinated, working together. I squinted, trying to make out details through the blizzard, but it was impossible. All I could see were silhouettes, dark against the white, clustered around the unmarked trailer. I reached for the CB again, intending to report what I was seeing, but hesitated. What would I even say? There are people near a trailer. That wasn't a crime. That wasn't even suspicious. Not on the surface. But my gut told me it was wrong. Everything about this was wrong. The unmarked crates, the warning, the figures moving in the storm like they knew exactly what they were doing. I set the mic down and watched, feeling helpless and exposed. Then the lights came. Faint at first, just a glow diffused through the snow, but growing stronger, right ahead and blue, the unmistakable pulse of emergency vehicles. The plow was out front, a massive beast of a machine with a blade wide enough to clear both lanes, its amber strobes cutting through the white. Behind it, I could make out the shapes of patrol cars and what looked like a fire truck, all moving in a slow, deliberate convoy. Relief flooded through me, so strong it was almost painful. The plow stopped about 100 yards back, its lights illuminating the wreckage in harsh, flickering detail. Troopers stepped out, bundled against the cold, flashlights sweeping across the scene. I saw one of them approach the jackknifed semi, another heading toward the car with the crumpled hood. A third trooper walked toward my truck, and I rolled down the window as he approached. He was older, weathered face, partially hidden by a thick scarf, but his eyes were sharp and assessing. You the one who called it in? He asked, his voice muffled by the wind. Yeah, I said. Stellan Kirk Gaby. Got 2 people with me, one with a head injury, one in shock. There's more out there, but I couldn't get to all of them. He nodded, making a note on a small pad he pulled from his coat. Ambulance is coming up now. We'll get them sorted. You see how it started? I hesitated, the man's warning echoing in my mind. Whiteout, I said carefully. First truck jackknifed, rest piled in. Couldn't see 5 feet ahead. It was the truth, just not all of it. The trooper studied me for a moment, and I wondered if he could sense I was holding back. But he just nodded again and turned to wave over a pair of paramedics. They got the injured driver out first, strapping him to a gurney and loading him into the back of the ambulance with practiced efficiency. The woman went next, and I handed her the blanket as she climbed down, telling her to keep it. She looked back at me, and for a second I saw gratitude mixed with something else. Fear, maybe. Or recognition that we'd both survived something that could have gone very differently. Then she was gone, and I was alone again. I stepped down from the cab, my legs stiff from sitting, and did a slow walk around the rig. The snow was already piling up against the tires, and I knew I'd need to clear it before I could move. But first, I needed to see. I needed to confirm what I'd glimpsed through the storm. I moved carefully toward the wreckage, staying close to the plow's lights, trying to look like just another driver assessing damage. The unmarked trailer was still there, doors closed now. No sign of the figures I'd seen earlier. A trooper was standing near it, talking into his radio, his back to me. I got close enough to see the trailer's plate, memorizing the number out of habit more than any real plan. Then I heard a voice behind me, low and familiar. "You're persistent, I'll give you that." I turned slowly. The man was back, standing just outside the ring of light, his face still obscured, but I could feel his eyes on me, cold and calculating. "Just checking my rig," I said evenly, "making sure I can roll when they clear the road." He stepped closer, and I caught a better look at him now. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a jawline that looked like it had been chiseled from the same stone as the Badlands. There was a scar running along his left cheek, barely visible under the shadow of his cap. "Smart," he said, his tone almost friendly. "Real smart to keep your head down, do your job, and not ask questions." It was a threat wrapped in a compliment, and we both knew it. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. He held my gaze for a long moment, then turned and walked away, disappearing into the cluster of emergency vehicles like he'd never been there at all. I stood there, snow swirling around me, and realized I was shaking. Not from the cold, from the understanding that I'd just been marked, identified as someone who'd seen too much and needed to be managed. I returned to my truck and climbed inside, locking the door behind me. The paramedics were loading the last of the injured into ambulances, and the wrecker trucks were starting to arrive, their crews already assessing which vehicles could be moved and which needed to be cut apart. The plow had cleared a single lane, and a trooper was directing the few unscathed vehicles through, one at a time. I'd be next, or close to it. I just needed to keep quiet, nod when spoken to, and get the hell out of here. But as I sat there, engine idling, watching the controlled chaos outside, I couldn't shake the image of those unmarked crates. Couldn't stop thinking about the man and his warnings. Couldn't ignore the fact that I was now part of something, whether I wanted to be or not. And the worst part? I had no idea who to trust. The patrol was here, doing their job. But what if some of them were part of it too? What if the whole thing was bigger than a single trailer and a single storm? The knock on my window made me jump. I turned to see a trooper, different from the first, younger, with a clean-shaven face and eyes that hadn't yet learned to hide their concern. I rolled down the window. "Stellan Kirkeby?" he asked. I nodded. "Yeah, that's me." He glanced at a clipboard in his hand. "You're clear to go. Take it slow. Road's still rough. Stay in the cleared lane and don't stop until you hit the next truck plaza." I thanked him and started to roll up the window, but he stopped me. "Hey," he said, his voice quieter now. "You see anything unusual out here? Anything that didn't sit right?" I froze, the question hanging between us like a trap I wasn't sure how to avoid. His eyes were earnest, searching, and I realized he wasn't asking out of curiosity. He was asking because he suspected something too, but trusting him meant risking everything. If he was clean, maybe I'd get help. If he wasn't, I'd be signing my own death warrant. I made my choice. Just a bad wreck, I said, my voice steady. Whiteout, zero visibility. People did what they could. He held my gaze for a moment longer, then nodded slowly, disappointment flickering across his face. Right. Drive safe. He stepped back, and I rolled up the window. I put the truck in gear and eased forward, following the trail the plow had carved through the snow. The wreckage fell away behind me, swallowed by the storm, and I focused on the road ahead. But I couldn't stop thinking about the young trooper's question, the way he'd looked at me like he was hoping I'd be brave enough to speak up. Maybe he was one of the good ones. Maybe he could have helped. Or maybe I'd just saved my own life by keeping my mouth shut. Either way, I was rolling now, putting miles between me and the pileup, between me and the man with the scar and the unmarked trailer. But I knew, deep down, that this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The cleared lane was narrow, barely wide enough for my rig to squeeze through without the trailer tires catching the snowbank on either side. The plow had done what it could, but the storm was relentless, already starting to fill in the path with fresh powder. I kept my speed at 20, maybe 25, eyes locked on the reflector posts that marked the edge of the pavement. The wind buffeted the trailer, making it sway just enough to keep my knuckles white on the wheel. Every few seconds I'd check the mirrors, half expecting to see headlights following me, but there was nothing except the swirling white void. The next truck plaza was supposed to be 30 miles east, a Flying J, just past Valley City. 30 miles felt like 300 in conditions like this. I counted mile markers when I could see them, watching the numbers creep up with agonizing slowness. My mind kept circling back to the pileup, to the unmarked trailer, to the man with the scar and his calm, measured threats. I tried to rationalize it, tried to tell myself it wasn't my problem, that I'd done what I was supposed to do by calling it in and staying safe. But the rationalization felt hollow, like I was lying to myself in the same way I'd lied to that young trooper. The CB came alive again, breaking the oppressive silence. Eastbound on 94, anyone near Valley City? The voice was different this time, older, gravelly, with the kind of weariness that comes from too many years on the road. I hesitated, then keyed the mic. This is eastbound, about 15 miles out. Roads are rough but passable, you in the area. A pause, then the voice came back. Yeah, sitting at the Flying J. Got word there was a pileup back west. You come through that? I considered my answer carefully. Yeah, came through it. Multi-vehicle, whiteout conditions. Patrol's got it under control now. Another pause, longer this time. When the voice returned, it had a different quality, like the driver was choosing his words with the same caution I was. They clear the road, or you had to push through wreckage? It was an odd question, specific in a way that made me uneasy. Plows cleared a lane, I said, keeping it simple. Took a while, but they got it done. Static filled the silence that followed, and I waited, unsure if the conversation was over. Then, you see a gray Peterbilt back there? Older model, flatbed trailer? My pulse quickened. The unmarked trailer had been on a Peterbilt, I was sure of it. But I wasn't about to confirm that over an open channel where anyone could be listening. Didn't get a good look at makes and models, I said, my tone deliberately flat. Visibility was near zero. Sorry. The static returned, and this time it stayed. Whoever had been asking wasn't interested in small talk. They'd been fishing for information, trying to figure out if their cargo or their operation had been compromised. And I'd just told them, in so many words, that I wasn't talking. I set the mic down and flexed my fingers, realizing how tightly I'd been gripping it. The question confirmed what I'd already suspected. This wasn't just about one trailer or one storm. There were more people involved, more layers to whatever was being moved across I-94 under the cover of a blizzard. The lights of the Flying J appeared like a beacon through the snow, the tall sign glowing orange and white against the darkness. I'd never been so relieved to see a truck stop in my life. The lot was maybe half full, rigs parked in haphazard rows, drivers who'd had the sense to pull off before the worst of the storm hit. I found a spot near the back, away from the fuel islands, and backed in carefully. The moment I set the brakes and killed the engine, exhaustion hit me like a physical weight. My shoulders ached, my hands were stiff, and my eyes burned from staring into the snow for hours. But I couldn't rest yet. I needed to think, needed to figure out my next move. I grabbed my phone, hoping for a signal, and was rewarded with 2 bars. It wasn't much, but it was enough. I pulled up the browser and typed in the trailer plate number I'd memorized, not expecting much, but needing to try. The search returned nothing useful, just generic results about vehicle registration databases that required law enforcement credentials to access. I switched tactics and searched for recent news about I-94, looking for any reports of the pileup or unusual cargo seizures. Nothing. It was too soon, and if the people involved had any say in it, there might never be a report. I climbed down from the cab, my boots crunching in the snow, and made my way toward the main building. The wind had died down slightly, but the cold was still brutal, seeping through my coat and biting at my face. Inside, the truck stop was warmly lit and crowded. Drivers clustered around tables with coffee and food, their voices a low murmur of shared experiences and complaints about the weather. I grabbed a cup of coffee from the self-serve station and found an empty booth near the back, where I could watch the door and the parking lot through the wide windows. I'd been sitting there maybe 10 minutes when I noticed him, the man from the pileup, the one with the scar, standing near the fuel desk talking to another driver. He was cleaned up now, the snow brushed off, his cap replaced with a plain baseball hat. But I recognized the build, the way he carried himself with that quiet, dangerous confidence. My first instinct was to get up and leave, to walk out the back and disappear into the lot before he saw me. But I forced myself to stay still, to sip my coffee like I didn't have a care in the world. Running would only draw attention, and attention was the last thing I needed. He didn't look my way, didn't seem to notice me at all. He finished his conversation, clapped the other driver on the shoulder, and walked toward the exit. I watched him through the window as he crossed the lot, heading toward a dark pickup truck parked near the entrance. He climbed in, and the truck pulled out, headlights cutting through the snow as it turned toward the westbound ramp. Back toward the pileup. Back toward whatever mess he was cleaning up. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding and pulled out my phone again. This time, I opened the messaging app and typed out a quick note to my dispatcher. Caught in pileup on I-94 near mile 287. Delayed but safe. Will update ETA in AM. I hit send and watched the message sit there, the little indicator spinning as it tried to push through the weak signal. After a few seconds, it went through, and I pocketed the phone. At least someone knew where I was, even if they didn't know the full story. I was about to head back to my truck when a voice behind me said, "Mind if I sit?" I turned to see the young trooper from the pileup, the one who'd asked if I'd seen anything unusual. He was out of uniform now, wearing jeans and a heavy flannel shirt, but I recognized his face immediately. He looked tired, the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that comes from working a scene like that in sub-zero temperatures. I gestured to the seat across from me, and he slid into the booth, setting a cup of coffee on the table. "Didn't expect to see you here," I said carefully. He gave a faint smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Could say the same. Thought you'd be halfway to Minneapolis by now." I shrugged. Storm slowed me down. Figured it was safer to wait it out. He nodded, stirring sugar into his coffee with a small wooden stick. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said, "I'm Halvor Thorson. State Patrol, but I guess you figured that." I introduced myself, and we shook hands across the table. His grip was firm, his palm rough with calluses. "You handled yourself well back there," he said, his voice low enough that it wouldn't carry to the nearby tables. "Kept people calm, called it in quick. That probably saved lives." I didn't know how to respond to that, so I just nodded. He took a sip of his coffee, and I could see him working up to something, weighing his words. Finally, he said, "That trailer, the gray Peterbilt with the unmarked cargo. You got a good look at it?" I felt my chest tighten. This was the moment I'd been dreading, the question I'd been avoiding since I'd rolled away from the wreckage. I could lie again, stick to the script I'd already committed to. Or I could trust him, take the risk that he was one of the good ones. "I saw it," I said quietly. "Saw the crates inside. No labels, no markings, just wood and straps." Halvor's jaw tightened, and he glanced toward the window, checking to see if anyone was watching us. "You talk to anyone about it? Call it in?" I shook my head. Guy came up to me, told me to forget what I saw, made it real clear that asking questions wasn't in my best interest. Halvor cursed under his breath, his fingers drumming against the side of his coffee cup. "Yeah, that tracks. We've been hearing rumors for months now, shipments moving through the state, always during storms, always on routes that get shut down or delayed. By the time we get there, the cargo's clean or it's gone." "You think tonight was part of it?" I asked. He nodded. "I know it was. That pileup, it wasn't an accident. Someone staged it, used the whiteout as cover to move something they didn't want seen. And when things went sideways, they adapted. Got their people in place, made sure the right trailer disappeared before anyone could inspect it too closely." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. "You're saying they caused the pileup on purpose?" Halvor leaned back, rubbing his eyes. "Not directly, but they knew the storm was coming, knew the roads would be a mess. They probably had a rig ready to jackknife, create a bottleneck. Then they move their cargo through while everyone's distracted." "That's insane," I said, though even as I said it, I knew it wasn't. I'd seen the organization, the coordination, the way that man had moved through the chaos like he owned it. "Insane, maybe," Halvor said, "but effective. And we can't prove a damn thing. No plates, no manifests, no witnesses willing to talk." He looked at me pointedly when he said that last part, and I felt the weight of it. I was a witness. I'd seen the crates, talked to the man, memorized the plate number. But being a witness meant painting a target on my back, and I had no illusions about what that would mean. "What do you want from me?" I asked. Halvor sighed. "Honestly, I don't know. I can't protect you. Not officially. If you go on record, if you testify, they'll know. And these people, they're not the kind who let loose ends walk away." He paused, then added, "But if you're willing to share what you know, off the record, it might help us build a case. Connect some dots." I considered it, turning the idea over in my mind. Off the record meant no protection, no guarantees. It meant trusting that Halvor was who he said he was, that he wasn't part of the network himself. But it also meant maybe, just maybe, doing the right thing. "The plate number," I said finally. "I got it memorized. You want it?" Halvor pulled out a small notepad and a pen, sliding them across the table. I wrote down the number, my handwriting shaky from adrenaline and cold. He took the notepad back, glanced at it, and tucked it into his shirt pocket. "This helps," he said. "More than you know." I wanted to ask what he'd do with it, how he'd use it without exposing me, but I didn't. Some things were better left unasked. We sat in silence for a few more minutes, finishing our coffee. Then Halvor stood, zipping up his coat. "You should get some rest. Roads will be clear in the morning, and you'll want to be gone before anyone starts asking questions." I nodded, standing as well. "What about you?" He gave a grim smile. "I've got a long shift ahead, lots of reports to file, lots of details to forget." It was his way of saying he'd keep me out of it, at least as much as he could. I appreciated it, even if I didn't fully believe it would be enough. As he turned to leave, I called out, "Halvor!" He stopped, looking back. "Be careful," I said. "If they're as organized as you say, they're watching everyone, including you." He nodded slowly. "I know, but someone's got to push back, even if it's just small steps." Then he was gone, disappearing into the cold night, and I was alone again with the weight of what I'd just done. I returned to my truck, climbed into the sleeper berth, and lay there staring at the ceiling. Sleep didn't come easy. Every sound outside, footsteps, engines starting, the scrape of a snow shovel made me tense. I kept replaying the conversation with Halvor, wondering if I'd made the right choice, wondering if I'd just signed my own death warrant by giving him that plate number. But part of me, the part that still believed in doing the right thing even when it was dangerous, felt a strange sense of relief. Hours passed, and the storm outside began to ease. The wind died down, and the snow slowed to a gentle fall. I must have dozed off at some point because I woke to the sound of engines rumbling to life, drivers preparing to roll out now that the roads were clearing. I sat up, checked the time, and saw it was just past 5 a.m. The sky outside was still dark, but the worst of the blizzard had passed. I climbed into the driver's seat, started the engine, and let it warm up while I did a quick walk around. Everything looked intact. No damage from the storm, no signs of tampering. I climbed back in, released the brakes, and eased out of the parking spot. The lot was emptying quickly, drivers eager to make up lost time. I joined the flow, heading toward the eastbound ramp, and merged onto I-94. The road was clearer now, a single lane plowed and salted, with crews working to open the second lane. I settled into a steady rhythm, the truck humming beneath me, and focused on the miles ahead. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that somewhere out there someone had noticed the young trooper talking to me, had seen me writing in that notepad, had marked me as a problem that needed to be dealt with. I checked the mirrors constantly, looking for a tail, for any sign that I was being followed. The highway stretched out empty and white, and I told myself I was being paranoid. But paranoia, I'd learned, was just another word for survival instinct. As the sun began to rise, pale and weak through the thinning clouds, I passed the mile marker where the pileup had been. The wreckage was gone, cleared away by the wreckers and the plows, leaving nothing but tire tracks and disturbed snow. It was like it had never happened, like the whole night had been a fever dream. But I knew better. I had the plate number memorized, had the image of those unmarked crates burned into my mind. And somewhere, Halvor Thorson had that number in his pocket. A small piece of evidence in a case that might never see the light of day. I drove on, the miles falling away, and tried to focus on the road. Tried to tell myself that I'd done what I could, that the rest was out of my hands. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Not even close. The sun was fully up by the time I crossed into Minnesota, a pale disk behind layers of gray clouds that promised more snow before nightfall. The highways were clearing, traffic picking up as the morning commute began, and I should have felt relief. Should have felt like the worst was behind me. But every mile that passed only wound the tension tighter in my chest. I kept checking the mirrors, watching for vehicles that stayed too close for too long, for patterns that didn't fit the normal flow of highway traffic. Twice, I thought I spotted the same dark pickup, but both times it peeled off at an exit, and I convinced myself I was seeing ghosts. My phone rang just past the Minnesota border, the Bluetooth connecting automatically. The name on the display read Dispatch, and I answered with a weariness that had seeped into my bones. "Kirkeby," I said, my voice rough from too little sleep and too much coffee. The dispatcher's voice was clipped, professional. "Stellan, we need you to divert. New pickup in Moorhead. Priority load going to Duluth. They're paying premium for immediate transport." I frowned, glancing at my fuel gauge. I'm already committed to the Minneapolis run. Load's time-sensitive. There was a pause, and when the dispatcher spoke again, her tone had shifted slightly, harder. "This comes from higher up. Client specifically requested you. Says you came recommended." The words hit me like a fist to the gut. "Client specifically requested you." Nobody requests a specific driver for a standard load. Not unless they know that driver. Not unless they have a reason. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. "Who's the client?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Another pause. "Doesn't say. Just listed as priority freight. Signature required on pickup. You'll get the details when you arrive at the warehouse." I wanted to refuse, wanted to tell dispatch to find another driver, but I knew how that would look. Refusing a priority load without cause was grounds for termination, or at least suspension. And if the people behind that unmarked trailer were the ones making the request, refusing would only confirm that I was a problem that needed to be dealt with. I was trapped, and they knew it. "Send me the address," I said finally. "I'll head there now." The dispatcher confirmed and ended the call, leaving me alone with the hum of the engine and the growing certainty that I'd just been summoned into something I wouldn't walk away from easily. The warehouse in Moorhead was on the industrial edge of town, a sprawling complex of corrugated metal buildings surrounded by chain-link fencing. The sign out front read, "Tollefson Freight Services." The letters faded and weathered. I pulled up to the gate, and a guard stepped out of a small booth, clipboard in hand. He was young, early 20s, with the kind of bored expression that came from working a job where nothing interesting ever happened. "Name?" he asked, not looking up from his clipboard. "Stellan Kirkeby, here for a pickup." He scanned the list, found my name, and waved me through without another word. I drove slowly through the lot, past rows of trailers in various states of loading and repair, until I reached the main building. A bay door was open, and I could see figures moving inside, silhouettes against the harsh fluorescent lighting. I backed up to the dock, set the brakes, and climbed down, my hand instinctively checking that my phone was in my pocket, though I had no illusion that it would help if things went sideways. A man emerged from the building, older, maybe late 50s, with a thick build and a face that looked like it had been carved from the same unforgiving prairie stone as the landscape. He wore a heavy work jacket with the name Orvin stitched above the breast pocket. "Kirkeby?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. I nodded. "That's me." He looked me over, his eyes sharp and assessing like he was taking my measure. "Orvin Tollefson, this is my operation. You're here for the Duluth load." It wasn't a question. "That's right," I said. "Dispatch said it was priority." Orvin grunted, turning back towards the building. "Follow me. We'll get you loaded and on your way." I followed him inside, every instinct screaming at me to turn around and run. The warehouse was dimly lit, the air thick with the smell of diesel and grease. Forklifts moved in the distance, their backup alarms echoing off the metal walls. Orvin led me to a small office tucked into the corner of the building, its windows covered with yellowed blinds. He gestured to a chair, and I sat, feeling the weight of his gaze. He pulled a manila envelope from a desk drawer and slid it across to me. "Your instructions," he said. "Load's already on your trailer. All you need to do is drive it to Duluth, drop it at the specified location, and collect your signature. Simple." I opened the envelope, pulling out a single sheet of paper. The destination was a warehouse on the outskirts of Duluth. No company name, just an address. The payment listed was 3 times my usual rate for a run that distance. "What's in the load?" I asked, looking up at Orvin. His expression didn't change. "Does it matter?" The question hung in the air between us, heavy with implication. I knew the answer. It mattered, but asking too many questions would only make things worse. I folded the paper and tucked it back into the envelope. "When do I leave?" Orvin leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving mine. "Now. And Kirkaby, don't make any stops you don't have to. Don't talk to anyone about this load. You get to Duluth, you drop it, you collect your money, and you forget this ever happened." It was the same script, the same threat wrapped in professional language. I nodded, standing. Understood. Orvin watched me leave, and I could feel his eyes on my back the entire walk to the truck. I climbed into the cab, started the engine, and pulled away from the dock, my heart pounding. As I drove through the gate and back onto the main road, I glanced in the mirror and saw Orvin standing in the warehouse doorway, phone pressed to his ear. He was making a call, and I had no doubt it was about me. The drive to Duluth should have taken just under 4 hours, but I was making it in a fog of paranoia and dread. I didn't know what was in the trailer, and I didn't want to know. Part of me considered pulling over, opening the doors, and seeing for myself, but I knew that would be a mistake. If I looked, I became a liability. If I stayed ignorant, I was just a driver doing his job. It was a thin line, and I was walking it with no safety net. The highway stretched out ahead, the landscape a blur of white fields and skeletal trees. I passed through small towns, their main streets quiet and empty in the midday cold, and tried to focus on the mechanics of driving, on the simple task of keeping the truck between the lines, but my mind wouldn't let go. I kept thinking about the pileup, about the unmarked trailer and the man with the scar. I thought about Halvor Thorson and the plate number I'd given him, about whether he'd been able to do anything with it, or if it had just disappeared into the bureaucratic void. And I thought about what would happen when I reached Duluth, when I handed over this load and walked away. Would they let me walk away? Or was this delivery just a way to tie up a loose end, to make sure the witness who'd seen too much never had the chance to talk? I was about an hour outside Duluth when I saw the truck stop ahead, a small place with just a few pumps and a diner attached. I wasn't low on fuel, didn't need a break, but something made me signal and pull off the highway. Maybe it was instinct, or maybe it was the part of me that still believed in making my own choices, even small ones. I parked away from the other vehicles and sat there for a moment, engine idling, trying to decide what to do. Then I saw it, a state patrol car parked near the diner, its occupant visible through the window, sipping coffee. I don't know what made me do it. Maybe desperation, maybe a last shred of hope that someone could help. I climbed down from the cab and walked toward the diner, the cold biting at my face. Inside, the trooper looked up as I entered, and I recognized him immediately. It was Halvor Thorson. For a moment, we just stared at each other, both of us processing the impossibility of the coincidence. Then he gestured to the seat across from him, and I sat, my hands shaking slightly as I pulled off my gloves. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my voice low. Halvor glanced around the diner, making sure we weren't being overheard. "Could ask you the same thing. Thought you'd be in Minneapolis by now." I shook my head. "Got diverted. New load, Moorhead to Duluth. They requested me specifically." His jaw tightened, and I saw the realization dawn in his eyes. Tollefson Freight? I nodded. How'd you know? Halver leaned back, rubbing his face. Because I've been tracking them. That plate number you gave me? It's registered to Tollefson, or at least it was until it disappeared from the system 2 days ago. Orvin Tollefson runs a network, moves contraband across state lines using legitimate freight as cover. We've been building a case for months. And you didn't think to warn me? I said, anger flaring. Halvor met my gaze, and I saw something in his eyes that looked like regret. I didn't know they'd pull you in. I thought you'd be clear, that you'd delivered your load and moved on. But if they requested you specifically, it means they know. They know you talked to me or they suspect it. The words hit me like a physical blow. So what do I do? Halvor was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then he said, You deliver the load, you do exactly what they told you to do. But when you get to Duluth, you call me. I'll have a unit standing by and we'll move in as soon as you're clear. And if they don't let me leave? I asked. Halvor's expression was grim. Then you make sure you're in a public place, somewhere with witnesses. Don't go anywhere isolated. Don't let them separate you from your truck. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was all I had. I nodded, standing. I'll call you. Halvor reached across the table, gripping my arm. Stellan, be careful. These people, they don't leave loose ends. You've already seen too much, and they know it. I pulled my arm free and walked out of the diner, the cold hitting me again as I crossed the lot to my truck. I climbed in, started the engine, and pulled back onto the highway, the weight of what was coming pressing down on me. The rest of the drive passed in a blur. I barely registered the towns I drove through, the other vehicles on the road. My focus had narrowed to a single point. Get to Duluth, drop the load, and get out alive. The address Orvin had given me led to a warehouse district on the north edge of the city, a cluster of aging buildings surrounded by empty lots and chain-link fences. I found the right building, a nondescript structure with no signage, and backed up to the loading dock as instructed. I set the brakes, grabbed my phone, and sent a quick text to Halvor. At the location, moving in now, I climbed down and approached the bay door, which was already open. A figure stepped out of the shadows, and my blood ran cold. It was the man with the scar, the one from the pile-up. He looked at me with that same calm, dangerous expression, and I knew in that moment that this had always been the endgame. Kirkaby, he said, his voice almost friendly. Right on time. I forced myself to stay calm, to not let the fear show. Where do you want me to drop the trailer? He gestured to the dock. Right there's fine. My crew will unload. You just need to sign off on the delivery. I moved to unhitch the trailer, my hands working on autopilot while my mind raced. He watched me the entire time, and I could feel the threat radiating off him like heat. When the trailer was free, I climbed back into the cab and pulled forward, giving his crew room to work. I parked and stepped down again, clipboard in hand, the delivery sheet clipped to it. The man with the scar took it, scanned the information, and pulled out a pen. He signed with a flourish and handed it back to me. There you go, all done. I took the clipboard, ready to get back in my truck and drive away as fast as the law would allow. But then he said, You know, Stellan, you should have kept your mouth shut. I froze, my hand on the door handle. I don't know what you're talking about. He smiled, and it was the coldest thing I'd ever seen. Sure you do. You talked to that trooper. Gave him information you shouldn't have. That makes you a problem. I turned slowly, facing him. I was just trying to help people at the pile-up, that's all. He shook his head. No, you were trying to be a hero. And heroes, they tend to have short careers in this line of work. I saw the movement out of the corner of my eye, another figure emerging from the warehouse, and I knew I was out of time. I did the only thing I could think of. I yanked open the cab door, threw myself inside, and hit the locks. The engine was still running, and I jammed it into gear, tires spinning on the icy pavement as I floored it. I heard shouting behind me, saw the man with the scar running toward a vehicle, but I didn't look back. I just drove, blowing through a stop sign and hitting the main road at speed. My phone rang, and I answered without looking. "Halvor, they made me. They know I talked. I'm heading south on—" The line went dead. I glanced at the screen and saw no signal. I cursed, tossing the phone onto the passenger seat and focused on driving. I needed to get to a public place, somewhere with people and lights and witnesses. I saw a gas station ahead, brightly lit, and pulled in hard, the truck skidding slightly as I stopped. I jumped out and ran inside, the clerk looking up in alarm. "Call 911, I said, breathless. "Tell them there's a trucker in distress, possible assault. Tell them to send units to the North Warehouse District." The clerk stared at me, unsure, and I slapped my hand on the counter. "Now!" He grabbed the phone and dialed, and I turned to watch the lot through the windows. A dark pickup pulled in, and my heart sank, but it didn't approach. It just sat there, engine running, headlights on. Waiting. Minutes passed, each one stretching into eternity. Then I heard the sirens, faint at first but growing louder. 2 patrol cars pulled into the lot, lights flashing, and I felt a rush of relief so strong it nearly brought me to my knees. The officers approached, and I explained everything. The pileup, the unmarked cargo, the threats, the delivery. They listened, took notes, and radioed for backup. One of them stayed with me while the other went to check the warehouse district, but when they came back an hour later, they had nothing. The warehouse was empty, the trailer gone, no sign of the man with the scar or his crew. It was like they'd vanished into the snow, taking all the evidence with them. The officer looked at me with a mixture of sympathy and frustration. "We'll file a report, Mr. Kirkeby, but without physical evidence, without witnesses, there's not much we can do." I nodded, numb. I'd expected it, but it still stung. They let me go eventually, and I climbed back into my truck, exhausted and hollow. I drove to a truck stop on the edge of Duluth, parked in the most crowded section I could find, and just sat there. My phone buzzed. A message from Halvor. "Heard what happened. I'm sorry. We'll keep looking." It was small comfort, but it was something. I stared out at the rows of trucks, at the drivers going about their routines, oblivious to the danger that lurked just beneath the surface of this industry. And I realized that I'd never feel safe on these roads again. Days turned into weeks, and I kept driving. I had bills to pay, a life to maintain, and sitting still felt more dangerous than moving. But I changed my routes, avoided North Dakota and Minnesota as much as possible, and I never, ever picked up loads from companies I didn't know. I heard through the grapevine that Tollefson Freight had shut down. The owner disappeared. But I knew that was just one node in a much larger network. They'd reopen under a different name, in a different state, and the operation would continue. Halvor called me once a few months later. He said they'd made some arrests, small fish, but it was something. He thanked me for my help, told me I'd done the right thing. I wanted to believe him, but every time I checked my mirrors and saw headlights that stayed too close for too long, I wondered if I'd done anything but paint a target on my back. The last time I drove through North Dakota, I passed mile marker 287. The site of the pileup was just another stretch of highway now, no trace of what had happened there. But I slowed down anyway, remembering the whiteout, the wreckage, the unmarked trailer. Remembering the moment I'd decided to look inside and everything that had followed. I still haul freight. I still drive through blizzards and ice storms and whiteouts. But I've learned something that the old-timers always said, and I never fully understood until that night. The most dangerous cargo isn't what you're hauling. It's what you know. And out here, on these endless highways, knowledge can get you killed faster than any jackknife or skid. I don't stop at isolated rest areas anymore. I don't help stranded motorists unless I can do it from inside my locked cab with 911 on the line. And I sure as hell don't look inside trailers that aren't my business. Because somewhere out there, on a night when the snow turns the world white and the wind howls across the prairie, another driver will see something they shouldn't. They'll make the same choice I did, thinking they're doing the right thing. And they'll learn, just like I did, that sometimes the right thing and the safe thing are miles apart. I just hope they're luckier than I was. I hope they drive away and never look back. Because the thing about loose ends is they don't stay loose forever. Someone always comes back to tie them off, and I'm still waiting for my turn. There's a particular kind of cold that settles over Minnesota's Iron Range in late November. The kind that seeps through your coat and into your bones before you even realize you're freezing. It's not just the temperature, though that's brutal enough. It's the way the wind comes screaming across Lake Superior, picking up moisture and turning it into something mean, something that coats every surface in a layer of ice so slick you can barely stand, let alone drive. I've been running freight through the Iron Range for 12 years, and I've learned to read the weather the way some people read books. You look at the sky, feel the wind, watch how the locals are moving, and you know whether you're going to make your delivery or spend the night in a truck stop praying the power doesn't go out. My name is Luther Brackenridge, and I've been behind the wheel since I was 23. Started with local runs around Duluth, worked my way up to long haul, and eventually found my niche running the northern routes that most drivers avoid. The Iron Range, the Boundary Waters, the stretches of highway where you can drive for an hour without seeing another soul. It suits me, always has. I'm not much for conversation, never have been, and the solitude of the road feels more like home than any apartment I've ever rented. But that November night in 2017, I would have given anything for company, for another set of headlights in my mirror, for the crackle of a CB voice telling me I wasn't alone. The load was routine, at least on paper. Industrial equipment parts heading from Duluth up to Ely, a mining town that's seen better days but still has enough operations running to keep the trucks moving. The route was US 2 to State Route 53, then north through the forest until you hit civilization again. In good weather, it's a 6-hour drive, maybe 7 if you account for fuel stops and the mandatory log breaks. But the forecast that morning should have been my first warning. Freezing rain starting after sunset, accumulation of a 1/4 inch, winds gusting to 40 miles per hour. The dispatcher had flagged it as a yellow alert. Proceed with caution, but not a red, which would have meant delay until conditions improved. I'd driven through worse, or so I told myself. I loaded up just after noon, did my pre-trip inspection with extra attention to the airlines and brake systems, and rolled out of the yard by 1 p.m. The sky was that particular shade of gray that promised misery, low clouds pressing down like a lid on a pot. The temperature hovered right at 32 degrees, that magical point where water doesn't know if it wants to be rain or ice. By the time I hit US 2, it had made its decision. The first drops hit the windshield as sleet, tiny pellets that pinged off the glass and bounced across the hood. Within minutes, it transitioned to freezing rain, coating everything in a thin, transparent shell. I dropped my speed to 45, then 40, watching the road ahead for the telltale shimmer that meant black ice. The wipers scraped across the windshield, struggling to keep up with the accumulation. Every overpass I passed under dripped with icicles, some of them already a foot long and growing. The CB was quiet, which was unusual for this corridor. Normally, you'd hear the ore haulers, the guys running between the mines and the processing plants, checking in with each other about road conditions and where the plows were staged. But tonight there was nothing. Just static and the occasional burst of interference that sounded almost like voices, but dissolved before I could make out words. I made it to the intersection with State Route 53 without incident, though my hands were cramped from gripping the wheel and my shoulders ached from the tension. The turn north was where things got tricky. The road narrowed, and the forest pressed in close on both sides, tall pines and birch trees that blocked what little light remained. The freezing rain was coming down harder now, and I could feel the truck wanting to slide on the corners, the trailer pushing me slightly with each gust of wind. I engaged the Jake brake carefully, not wanting to lock up the wheels, and kept my speed down to 30. It was going to be a long night. About 20 miles north of the intersection, I saw the first sign of trouble. A pair of hazard lights blinking weakly through the freezing rain, barely visible until I was almost on top of them. I slowed even further, easing the truck to a crawl as I approached. It was a pickup, a newer model, pulled halfway off the road with its front end buried in a snowbank. The driver's door was open and I could see a figure hunched over the wheel, not moving. I stopped the truck, set the brakes, and grabbed my flashlight. Protocol says you don't stop for stranded motorists in conditions like this, not unless you can do it safely, and not unless you know what you're getting into. But something about the stillness of that figure made me uneasy. I climbed down carefully, the soles of my boots immediately slipping on the ice-coated pavement. I caught myself on the grab handle and moved slowly toward the pickup, one hand on the truck for balance. "Hey!" I called out, my voice nearly lost in the wind. "You okay?" No response. I got closer, shining the flashlight through the open door. The driver was a woman, maybe mid-40s, slumped forward with her head resting on the steering wheel. Her breath fogged the air in short, shallow bursts. She was alive, but something was wrong. I reached in and touched her shoulder gently. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" She stirred, lifting her head slightly, and I saw her eyes. Glassy, unfocused, the pupils dilated. "Cold," she mumbled, her voice thick and slurred. "So cold. Hypothermia, or close to it." Her skin was pale, almost bluish, and when I touched her hand, it was ice. I needed to get her warm, and fast. "Can you walk?" I asked. She nodded weakly, and I helped her out of the pickup, supporting her weight as we made our way back to my truck. The ice made every step a gamble, and twice I nearly went down, but I managed to get her to the passenger side and lift her into the cab. I cranked the heat up as high as it would go and grabbed a blanket from the sleeper, wrapping it around her shoulders. "What happened?" I asked, once I was sure she wasn't going to pass out. She blinked slowly, trying to focus. Hit ice. Spun out. Tried to call for help, but no signal. She held up her phone, the screen dark. Battery died. I checked my own phone and saw the same thing, no signal. We were in a dead zone, a stretch of highway where the towers were too far apart, and the terrain blocked what little coverage existed. I keyed the CB mic, hoping for a response. "This is southbound on Route 53, mile marker 142. Got a stranded motorist, possible hypothermia. Anyone out there?" Static. I tried again, adjusting the squelch, but got nothing. The woman was shivering now, a good sign that her body was trying to warm itself. I handed her my thermos of coffee, and she took it with trembling hands, sipping slowly. "Thank you," she whispered. "I thought I was going to die out there." I nodded, glancing out the windshield. The freezing rain was relentless, and the ice was building up on the mirrors and windshield faster than the defroster could keep up. We couldn't stay here, not in the middle of the highway, but moving meant risking another slide, another wreck. I was weighing my options when I saw the lights. They appeared through the trees, faint and yellowish, not the white of headlights but something softer, like lanterns or floodlights. They were off to the east, maybe a quarter-mile into the forest. I squinted, trying to make sense of it. There shouldn't be anything out there. No houses, no cabins, nothing but trees and old mining roads. "You see that?" I asked the woman. She followed my gaze and nodded. "What is it?" I didn't know, but it was the first sign of civilization I'd seen in miles, and right now, I needed help. I made a decision. "Stay here, keep warm, I'm going to check it out." She grabbed my arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "Don't leave me." I gently pried her fingers loose. "I'll be back, I promise. But if that's a work camp or a ranger station, they might have a radio, maybe even a medic. Just stay put and keep the doors locked." I climbed back down into the freezing rain, this time with my flashlight and a flare gun I kept in the emergency kit. The walk to the lights was treacherous, the forest floor coated in ice and hidden beneath a layer of slush. Branches snapped under the weight of the ice, crashing down around me with sounds like gunshots. I kept my eyes on the lights, using them as a beacon. As I got closer, I could make out shapes. Buildings, low and utilitarian, made of corrugated metal. There were 3 of them, arranged in a rough triangle around a central yard. Heavy equipment sat idle, covered in ice. A bulldozer, a backhoe, something that looked like a drill rig. This was a work site, maybe a mining survey or a logging operation. The lights were floodlights mounted on poles, running off a generator that I could hear rumbling somewhere in the background. I approached the nearest building, a long structure that looked like it might be an office or a bunkhouse, and knocked on the metal door. The sound echoed, but there was no response. I tried the handle and found it unlocked. The door swung open, and I stepped inside, shaking the ice off my coat. The interior was dim, lit by a single overhead bulb. It was warmer than outside, but not by much. The space was set up like a supply depot. Shelves lined with equipment, tools, crates of what looked like blasting caps and coils of wire. A desk sat in the corner with a 2-way radio on it, and I felt a surge of relief. I crossed to the desk and picked up the handset, but the radio was dead, the power light dark. I checked the cord and found it unplugged. I plugged it back in, and the radio crackled to life. I keyed the mic. "This is a traveler on State Route 53, requesting assistance. I have a stranded motorist with possible hypothermia. Anyone copy?" Static, then a voice, rough and irritated. "Who the hell is this? You're on a private channel." I was taken aback, but pressed on. "Sorry, didn't mean to intrude. I'm a trucker, stuck in the ice storm. Found this work site and thought I could use the radio to call for help." There was a pause. Then the voice came back, calmer, but still edged with suspicion. "Work site's closed. You shouldn't be there." I looked around the room, at the equipment and supplies. "Well, I'm here now, and I need help. Can you contact someone? Maybe the county sheriff or a road crew?" Another pause, longer this time. "Stay put, someone's coming." The transmission ended, and I set the handset down, uneasy. Something about the conversation felt wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on it. I turned to leave and nearly jumped out of my skin. A man stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the floodlights outside. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a heavy parka and a knit cap pulled low. I couldn't see his face clearly, but I could feel his eyes on me. "You the one on the radio?" he asked, his voice low and even. I nodded. "Yeah. I've got a stranded motorist in my truck. Needs medical attention. Thought you might have a way to call for help." He stepped inside, and the door swung shut behind him. Up close, I could see his face now, weathered and hard, with a thick beard dusted with ice. His eyes were pale, almost colorless, and they studied me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "We don't get visitors out here," he said, "especially not in weather like this." I forced a smile. "Wasn't planning on visiting. Just need to use a phone or a radio, then I'll be on my way." He glanced at the radio on the desk, then back at me. "Radios for company use only. Can't have outsiders broadcasting on our frequency." "Look," I said, trying to keep my tone reasonable. "I'm not trying to cause trouble. I just need help. There's a woman in my truck who's freezing to death. If you can't let me use the radio, at least point me toward someone who can." The man crossed his arms, his expression unreadable. "Storm's got the roads closed. No one's getting through tonight. Best thing you can do is bring her here, get her warm, and wait it out." It wasn't an invitation. It was a directive. And the way he said it, the weight behind the words, made it clear that refusing wasn't an option. I nodded slowly. "All right, I'll go get her." He stepped aside, letting me pass, and I walked back out into the freezing rain. The walk back to the truck felt longer, the ice more treacherous. My mind was racing. Something about that man, about the work site, felt off. The equipment, the supplies, the way he'd reacted to me being there. It didn't add up. But I didn't have a choice. The woman needed warmth, and the worksite was the only shelter for miles. I reached the truck and climbed back in, the woman looking at me with hopeful eyes. "Did you find help?" she asked. "Sort of," I said, starting the engine. "There's a worksite through the trees. They've got heat and shelter. We're going to ride this out there." She nodded, trusting me, and I felt a pang of guilt. Because as I turned the wheel and eased the truck off the highway, following the faint tracks the man must have left, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was driving us into something worse than the storm. The access road to the work site was barely visible, more of a suggestion than an actual path. Tree branches, heavy with ice, hung low enough to scrape the top of my trailer, and I could hear them dragging across the metal with a sound like fingernails on a chalkboard. The truck crawled forward in first gear, the tires slipping every few feet despite the chains I'd put on back in Duluth. The woman clutched the door handle, her knuckles white, eyes fixed on the darkness ahead. She hadn't said much since I'd returned, just nodded when I told her we were heading to shelter. I could see the fear in her face, but whether it was fear of the storm or something else, I couldn't tell. The floodlights grew brighter as we approached, casting harsh shadows across the yard. I could see the buildings more clearly now, 3 structures arranged around a central area churned to mud and ice. The largest building was the one I'd been in, the supply depot or office. The other 2 were smaller, one that looked like a garage with bay doors. The other possibly a bunkhouse or mess hall. The heavy equipment sat silent and menacing, the ice coating them, making them look like prehistoric creatures frozen in time. I pulled the truck as close to the main building as I dared, not wanting to get stuck in the mud, and set the brakes. "Stay close to me," I told the woman as we climbed down. She nodded, pulling the blanket tighter around her shoulders. The cold hit us immediately, the wind cutting through our clothes like it had a personal grudge. We hurried toward the building, and the door swung open before we reached it. The man from before stood there, backlit by the dim interior light. He stepped aside to let us in, and I noticed for the first time that he wasn't alone. 2 other men sat at a folding table near the back of the room, both of them watching us with the same unsettling intensity. "Get her by the heater," the bearded man said, gesturing to a propane unit in the corner. I guided the woman over and helped her settle into a metal folding chair positioned near the warmth. She held her hands out toward the heat, shivering violently. The bearded man followed us, standing just close enough that I felt crowded. "She gonna make it?" he asked, his tone suggesting the question was more about inconvenience than concern. I nodded. "She needs to warm up gradually. Maybe some hot coffee if you have it." One of the men at the table stood, a shorter guy with a patchy beard and nervous energy. He grabbed a dented thermos from a shelf and poured steaming liquid into a styrofoam cup, then brought it over. The woman took it gratefully, her hands still shaking as she raised it to her lips. I watched her take a few sips, some color starting to return to her face, and felt a small measure of relief. At least we'd gotten her out of immediate danger. But that relief was short-lived, as I looked around the room and really started to take in the details I'd missed before. The equipment on the shelves wasn't just mining gear. There were chains, not the tire chains you'd use on a truck, but heavy-duty lengths of chain with hooks and clasps. There were fuel canisters, dozens of them, lined up against one wall. And in the corner, partially hidden under a tarp, I could see what looked like oxygen tanks and cutting torches. It was the kind of setup you'd use for salvage work, or maybe something less legitimate. The men at the table were watching me now, and I could feel their eyes tracking every movement I made. "You boys mining out here?" I asked, trying to sound casual. The bearded man, who seemed to be in charge, shook his head. "Survey work, checking old claims, seeing what's worth reopening." It was a reasonable answer, the kind of thing that happened all the time in the Iron Range. But something about the way he said it felt rehearsed, like he'd given that explanation before and knew exactly how to make it sound believable. I nodded, not pushing. "Must be rough out here in winter." He shrugged. "We manage. Storms got us shut down for the night, but we'll be back at it once the road's clear." The shorter man had returned to the table, and I noticed him exchanging a glance with the third man, who hadn't moved or spoken yet. The third guy was older, maybe late 50s, with a lean face and eyes that looked like they'd seen things he'd rather forget. He wore a heavy canvas coat with the collar turned up, and his hands rested on the table, fingers drumming a slow, rhythmic pattern that set my nerves on edge. "How long you think this storm's gonna last?" I asked, directing the question to no one in particular. The bearded man considered it. "Radio says it'll blow through by morning. Roads should be passable by noon, assuming the county gets their plows out." I glanced at the radio on the desk, remembering how he'd reacted when I'd used it. "You got through to the county?" He shook his head. "That radio's company frequency. We don't use it for outside calls." It was the same line he'd given me before, and it still didn't sit right. The woman had stopped shivering, her breathing more regular now. She looked at me, and I saw a question in her eyes. I gave her a small nod, trying to reassure her that everything was fine, even though I wasn't sure I believed it myself. The bearded man noticed the exchange and moved closer to her. "You got a name?" he asked. She hesitated, then said quietly, "Sarah." He nodded. "I'm Ephraim Lindholm. I run this operation." He gestured to the other two men. "That's Dale, and the quiet one's Marcus." I introduced myself, and Ephraim shook my hand with a grip that was just a fraction too firm, a subtle show of dominance. "Luther Brackenridge. I haul freight out of Duluth." Ephraim's eyes narrowed slightly. "Long way from Duluth. What brings you up this way in a storm?" I explained about the load, the route to Ely, the freezing rain that had forced me to slow down. He listened, nodding occasionally, but I could see him processing every detail, filing it away. When I finished, he said, "Well, you're stuck here for the night. Might as well make yourself comfortable." It wasn't an invitation any more than his earlier directive had been. It was a statement of fact, a declaration of the situation I found myself in. I glanced toward the door, calculating. My truck was maybe 50 feet away, and in good conditions, I could be back in the cab and rolling in under a minute. But with the ice, the darkness, and the distance it might as well have been a mile, and leaving Sarah behind wasn't an option, not when she was barely recovered from hypothermia. I was trapped, and Ephraim knew it. "Appreciate the hospitality," I said, keeping my tone neutral. Ephraim smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Not a problem. We don't get many visitors, but we take care of our own out here." The way he said "our own" sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the temperature. I was being claimed, incorporated into some unspoken agreement I didn't understand, and judging by the way Dale and Marcus were watching, refusing wasn't an option. The hours crawled by with an oppressive slowness. Sarah dozed fitfully in her chair, the blanket wrapped tight around her. I sat on a wooden crate near the door, ostensibly resting but really watching, waiting for something to tip the situation one way or another. Ephraim and his crew busied themselves with tasks that seemed designed more to fill time than accomplish anything. Dale went out once, disappearing into the storm for about 20 minutes before returning with a canvas bag slung over his shoulder. He set it down near the desk with a heavy thud, and I caught a glimpse of something metallic inside before he covered it with a rag. Marcus broke his silence around 10 p.m., his voice a low rasp that sounded like it hurt to use. "Radio says the interstate's closed. Pile up near Grand Rapids." Ephraim looked up from the clipboard he'd been studying. "How many rigs?" Marcus shrugged. "Didn't say. Just said it's blocking both lanes." Ephraim grunted and went back to his clipboard. I filed the information away, wondering if it was true or just another piece of the performance they seemed to be putting on. Around midnight, Ephraim stood and stretched, his joints popping audibly. "Dale, you and Marcus take first watch. I'm going to grab a few hours." Watch. The word hung in the air, confirming what I'd already suspected. This wasn't just a work site shutting down for the night. They were guarding something, protecting it. Dale nodded and grabbed a thermos, pouring himself more coffee. Marcus pulled out a deck of cards and started shuffling with the practiced ease of someone who'd spent a lot of time waiting. Ephraim looked at me. "There's bunks in the next building if you and the lady want to get some real sleep. Heaters running, should be comfortable enough." I glanced at Sarah, who was awake now, watching the exchange with wary eyes. "We're fine here," I said. Ephraim's expression hardened slightly. "Wasn't a suggestion. You'll sleep better in a bunk, and we need this space for work come morning." I wanted to argue, wanted to insist on staying where I could keep an eye on things, but I could see the shift in his stance, the way his hand had moved closer to his belt. Whatever he had there, gun or knife, he was ready to use it if I pushed. "All right," I said, standing slowly. "We'll take you up on that." Ephraim's expression relaxed. "Good man. Follow me." He grabbed a flashlight and led us out into the storm. The wind had picked up again, driving the freezing rain sideways. I helped Sarah across the yard, the ice making every step treacherous. The bunkhouse was smaller than I'd expected, maybe 20 feet by 30, with a row of metal frame bunks along each wall. A propane heater glowed in the center, and the temperature inside was almost comfortable. "Pick any bunk," Ephraim said. "Bathroom's through that door, but the plumbing's frozen, so you'll have to use the outhouse back of the main building if nature calls." He paused at the door. "I'm going to lock this from the outside. Not because I don't trust you, but because we've had issues with equipment going missing. Can't be too careful." Before I could respond, he was gone, and I heard the distinctive click of a padlock engaging. Sarah looked at me, fear naked on her face now. "What is this place?" she whispered. I shook my head. "I don't know, but we're getting out of here as soon as the storm breaks." She nodded, but I could see she didn't believe me any more than I believed myself. I checked the door, confirming it was locked solid, then moved to the small window on the far wall. It was barred on the outside, the metal covered in ice. We were prisoners, and the pretense of hospitality had been dropped the moment that lock clicked shut. I tried to think, to come up with a plan. The window was too small and too secure to be an exit. The door was solid metal, and even if I could break the lock, Ephraim and his crew would hear it. My phone still had no signal, and even if it did, who would I call? The nearest sheriff's department was probably 40 miles away, and with the roads the way they were, they couldn't get here until morning at the earliest. We were on our own. Sarah had curled up on one of the lower bunks, the blanket pulled over her head. I could hear her crying softly, trying to muffle the sound. I wanted to comfort her, to tell her everything would be okay, but the words felt hollow. Instead, I sat on the bunk across from her and tried to piece together what I'd seen. The equipment, the chains, the fuel canisters, the way Ephraim had reacted to me using the radio, the watch rotation. It all pointed to something illegal, something they were protecting. And then it clicked. The canvas bag Dale had brought in. The weight of it, the metallic glimpse I'd caught. They weren't just surveying old mining claims. They were salvaging, stripping equipment from abandoned sites, maybe even active ones. Fuel, chains, cutting torches. It was everything you'd need to dismantle machinery and haul it out. And in a storm like this, with the roads shut down and the authorities focused on the weather, it was the perfect time to move stolen goods without being noticed. I stood and moved to the window again, peering out into the darkness. I could just make out the shape of my truck, the ice coating it, making it look like a ghost. Beyond it, I saw movement near the garage. Figures loading something onto a trailer hitched to a heavy-duty pickup. They were working fast, organized, and I realized this was their operation. The storm wasn't shutting them down, it was giving them cover. A sound outside the bunkhouse made me freeze. Footsteps, crunching through the ice, approaching the door. I moved quickly back to my bunk and lay down, feigning sleep. The lock rattled, and the door swung open. I kept my eyes barely slitted, watching through my lashes. It was Dale, the shorter man. He stood in the doorway, flashlight sweeping across the room. The beam lingered on Sarah's bunk, then moved to mine. I forced my breathing to stay slow and even, praying he'd buy the act. After what felt like an eternity, he grunted and backed out, the door closing and the lock clicking back into place. I waited until his footsteps faded, then sat up slowly. Sarah was awake, watching me in the dim light from the heater. "What do we do?" she whispered. I didn't have an answer, not yet, but I knew one thing for certain. We weren't going to wait around to become loose ends in whatever operation Ephraim was running. We needed to get out, and we needed to do it before they decided we'd seen too much. I moved to the heater and examined it closely. It was old, a simple propane unit with a manual valve and an exposed pilot light. An idea began to form, dangerous and desperate, but it was all I had. If I could create enough of a distraction, something that would pull Ephraim and his crew away from the buildings, we might have a chance to make it to the truck. It was a long shot, but it was better than sitting here waiting for our fate to be decided by men who locked people in bunkhouses. The storm raged outside, the wind howling like something alive and angry. Inside, I sat on the cold metal bunk and started planning our escape, knowing that when morning came, we'd either be free or we'd be dead. And out here, in the frozen heart of the Iron Range, I wasn't sure which outcome was more likely. The hours between midnight and dawn are the longest of any night. But when you're locked in a metal bunkhouse in the middle of nowhere, they stretch into something infinite. I sat on that bunk watching the propane heater's flame flicker, listening to Sarah's shallow breathing from across the room, and mentally cataloging every detail of what I'd seen. The fuel canisters, the cutting equipment, the way Ephraim's crew moved with a military precision. This wasn't some opportunistic theft ring. It was organized, practiced, probably running for months or even years. I thought about my truck sitting out there in the ice, my livelihood and my only means of escape just 50 feet away, but might as well be on the moon. The keys were in my pocket. I'd made sure of that before we left the cab, but keys don't mean much when you're locked behind a steel door with bars on the windows. The propane heater continued its quiet hiss, and I kept coming back to it. It was our only potential tool, our only source of leverage. But using it meant risk, the kind of risk that could get us both killed if I miscalculated. Around 3 a.m., I heard engines starting outside. Not my truck, something smaller, probably the pickup I'd seen them loading earlier. I moved to the window and pressed my face against the icy glass, trying to see through the condensation and the bars. The floodlights illuminated the yard in harsh white, and I could make out 2 figures in the pickup's cab. Dale was behind the wheel, and Marcus sat beside him, his lean face expressionless as always. The truck pulled out slowly, its bed loaded with equipment covered by a tarp, and disappeared down the access road toward the highway. So they were making runs, moving the stolen goods while the storm provided cover and kept law enforcement busy elsewhere. Smart, in a criminal sort of way, but it also meant the operation was down to just Ephraim, at least for however long it took Dale and Marcus to make their delivery and return. The thought sparked something in my mind, a possibility I hadn't considered before. If I could time it right, if I could create my distraction when Ephraim was alone, the odds shifted slightly more in our favor. I returned to examining the heater, this time with more purpose. The propane tank was secured to the base with a simple bracket and wing nuts, the kind you could loosen by hand if you had the strength. The feed line ran from the tank to the burner assembly through a rubber hose that had seen better days, cracked and brittle from age and heat exposure. If I could disconnect that hose and create a leak, the propane would fill the enclosed space. It wouldn't take much, just enough to make the atmosphere dangerous, enough that a single spark could turn the bunkhouse into a fireball. The idea was insane, suicidal even. But the alternative was waiting for Ephraim to decide what to do with the 2 witnesses who'd stumbled into his operation. And I had no illusions about how that decision would go. Men who locked people in bunkhouses and moved stolen goods in the middle of ice storms weren't the type to leave loose ends untied. Sarah stirred on her bunk, and I moved to her side, crouching down so we were at eye level. "Sarah," I whispered, "I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" She nodded, her eyes still glazed with exhaustion and fear. "We're getting out of here, but it's going to be dangerous, and I need you to do exactly what I say when I say it. Understand?" Another nod. I could see the questions forming, but she didn't ask them. Maybe she sensed that the less she knew, the better. Or maybe she was just too scared to want the details. Either way, I was grateful for her silence. I moved back to the heater and began working on the wing nuts, turning them slowly to avoid making noise. The metal was cold, biting into my fingers, but I kept at it until the first nut came free. The second followed, and then the third. The bracket loosened, and I carefully lifted the propane tank, feeling its weight, maybe 20 pounds half full. I set it down gently and examined the connection point. The hose was threaded onto a brass fitting, and with enough force, I could probably wrench it free. But doing so would release the propane all at once, filling the room in seconds. I needed a delay, something that would give us time to get clear before the gas reached dangerous levels. My eyes fell on Sarah's blanket, the one I'd given her from my truck. It was thick wool, the kind that burns slow and smoky. If I could create a smoldering ignition source, something that would take a few minutes to catch but would inevitably ignite the gas, we'd have our window. I pulled the blanket from Sarah's shoulders, ignoring her confused look, and tore a strip from the edge. Working quickly now, I twisted the strip into a tight coil and positioned it near the heater's pilot light, close enough to catch eventually but not immediately. Then I returned to the propane tank and gripped the hose fitting, bracing myself. This was the point of no return. Once I broke that seal, we were committed. I looked at Sarah one more time. When I open this door, you run for my truck. Don't look back. Don't wait for me, just run. The keys are in my pocket. If I don't make it, you drive out of here and you don't stop until you find help. She opened her mouth to protest, but I cut her off. Promise me, Sarah. She closed her mouth, tears streaming down her face, and nodded. I promise. I turned back to the tank, said a silent prayer to whatever might be listening, and wrenched the fitting with all my strength. It resisted for a moment, then gave way with a hiss that seemed impossibly loud in the quiet bunkhouse. Propane began venting from the disconnected hose, invisible but pungent, the smell of rotten eggs filling the air. I grabbed Sarah's arm and pulled her toward the door. The lock was still engaged from the outside, but the door itself was just metal, and the frame was old wood, weakened by years of moisture and freeze-thaw cycles. I stepped back, took a breath of the rapidly fouling air, and kicked the door just below the lock with every ounce of strength I had. The frame splintered but held. I kicked again, and this time the wood gave way, the door flying open with a crash that echoed across the yard. "Run!" I shouted, pushing Sarah ahead of me. She stumbled out into the freezing rain, and I was right behind her, my lungs burning from the propane I'd inhaled. The floodlights blazed across the yard, and I saw Ephraim emerge from the main building, his face twisted with rage. He had something in his hand, dark and angular, a pistol. He raised it, and I shoved Sarah to the side, throwing both of us behind a stack of crates just as the first shot rang out. The bullet pinged off metal somewhere above us, and I heard Ephraim shouting, words lost in the wind and the ringing in my ears. We scrambled forward, using the equipment as cover, the ice making every movement a desperate slide. My truck was ahead, maybe 30 feet, the driver's door facing us. I could see the chrome handle reflecting the floodlights, so close but still impossibly far. Another shot, this one closer, the bullet burying itself in the frozen mud inches from my foot. We reached the truck, and I yanked the door open, practically throwing Sarah inside. She scrambled across to the passenger seat, and I hauled myself up, slamming the door behind me. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition, but somehow I managed it. The engine turned over once, twice, and caught with a roar. I didn't wait for it to warm up, didn't check the mirrors, just jammed it into gear and stomped the accelerator. The truck lurched forward, tires spinning on the ice before finding purchase. I heard another shot, felt the impact somewhere in the trailer, but I didn't slow down. The access road loomed ahead, a narrow corridor of darkness between the trees. I aimed for it, praying the ice wouldn't send us into a trunk, and we plunged into the forest. Branches scraped the sides of the truck, and the trailer swayed dangerously. But I kept the accelerator down, putting distance between us and Ephraim. Behind us, through the trees, I saw a flash of orange light. The bunkhouse, the propane, the smoldering blanket, it had all come together. The explosion lit up the night. A brief second sun that turned the ice-covered forest into a landscape of crystal and fire. The shockwave reached us a moment later, a pressure wave that rocked the truck but didn't slow it. I allowed myself one glance in the mirror and saw the bunkhouse engulfed, flames licking at the sky, Ephraim silhouetted against the inferno. Then we were on the highway, the truck fishtailing as the tires hit the pavement. I fought the wheel, bringing the rig under control, and pointed it south, away from Ely, away from the delivery, away from everything except the desperate need to survive. Sarah was crying openly now, her hands clutched to her chest, but she was alive. We were both alive. For the moment, that was enough. We drove for 20 minutes before I saw the lights of a town, just a cluster of buildings around a single intersection, but it had a gas station with lights on and what looked like a small medical clinic next to it. I pulled into the lot, set the brakes, and sat there for a moment, my entire body shaking with adrenaline and exhaustion. Sarah looked at me, and I saw the question in her eyes. "We need to call the police," I said, my voice hoarse. "Report what happened. Let them handle it." She nodded, and we climbed down from the truck. The clinic door was locked, but there was a buzzer, and after a moment a woman appeared, middle-aged with kind eyes and a nurse's uniform. She took one look at us, at our disheveled appearance and the fear in our faces, and ushered us inside without a word. "I'm Ingrid," she said, her accent carrying the soft lilt of Scandinavian heritage. "Ingrid Soderquist. Come in, you both look half frozen." She led us to a small examination room and wrapped us in heated blankets, then brought coffee that tasted like the best thing I'd ever consumed. When we'd warmed up enough to talk, I explained everything. The stranded motorist, the work site, Ephraim and his crew, the locked bunkhouse, the escape. Ingrid listened without interruption, her expression growing more serious with each detail. When I finished, she picked up the phone on the wall and dialed. "Yes, this is Ingrid Soderquist at the Messaby Clinic. I need to report a crime and request immediate assistance." The conversation was brief, professional, and when she hung up, she turned to us. "Sheriff's deputy is on his way. Roads are still bad, but he should be here within the hour." She paused, studying my face. "You did the right thing, getting out of there. Men like Ephraim Lindholm, they don't let people walk away." The name, confirmation, sent a chill through me. "You know him?" Ingrid's expression hardened. "Everyone up here knows him, or knows of him. He's been running salvage operations for years, stripping equipment from closed mines, selling it for scrap. Sheriffs suspected him, but they've never been able to prove anything." "Until now," I said quietly. Ingrid nodded. "Until now." We waited in that small clinic, Sarah dozing in a chair, while I stared out the window at the frozen landscape. The sky was beginning to lighten, the storm finally breaking. Ice coated everything, turning the world into something beautiful and deadly. I thought about Ephraim, about whether he'd survived the explosion, or if he was still out there, plotting revenge. I thought about Dale and Marcus, about whether they'd return to find the operation in ruins and decide to hunt us down. The deputy arrived just as dawn broke fully, a young man in a tan uniform who looked barely old enough to shave. But his eyes were sharp, and he took detailed notes as I walked him through the story again. He radioed for backup, and within 2 hours, the lot was filled with law enforcement. State Patrol, County Sheriff, even what looked like ATF agents, their windbreakers marking them as federal. They asked the same questions over and over, cross-referencing our stories, checking details. Finally, one of the senior investigators, a woman with steel-gray hair and a no-nonsense demeanor, sat down across from me. "We sent units to the location you described. Found the burned-out bunkhouse, evidence of the operation, but no sign of Ephraim Lindholm or his associates. They're gone." I'd expected it, but hearing it confirmed still felt like a punch to the gut. "So they got away." The investigator shook her head. "They ran, but they left behind evidence, lots of it. Equipment with serial numbers, paper trails, radio logs. We'll find them. It's just a matter of time." I wanted to believe her, wanted to think that justice would catch up to men like Ephraim. But I'd been on the road long enough to know that sometimes people just vanished into the vast emptiness of the northern routes, and no amount of investigation could pull them back. The authorities kept us for most of the day, taking statements, photographing the damage to my truck where Ephraim's bullets had struck. Eventually, they let us go. Sarah had family in Duluth, and they arranged for her to be driven back. Before she left, she hugged me, holding on longer than necessary. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Then she was gone, and I was alone with my truck and the long drive ahead. The load was still in the trailer, untouched but now evidence in an ongoing investigation. They'd released it after processing, and I was cleared to complete the delivery to Ely, though the thought of driving back up that highway made my skin crawl. I climbed into the cab, started the engine, and sat there for a long moment, staring at the road ahead. Ingrid Soderquist appeared at my window, tapping gently on the glass. I rolled it down, and she handed me a piece of paper. "My number," she said. "If you need anything, if you remember something else, or if you just need to talk to someone who understands." I took the paper, tucking it into my shirt pocket. "Thank you." She stepped back, and I put the truck in gear, easing out of the lot and back onto the highway. The drive to Ely was uneventful, the roads finally clear, the sun bright against the snow. I dropped the load without incident, collected my signature, and turned back south. But as I drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that somewhere out there, Ephraim Lindholm was tracking my movements, waiting for the right moment. Every truck stop felt like a potential ambush, every rest area a trap. I made it back to Duluth by evening, dropped the trailer at the yard, and filed my report with the dispatch. They were sympathetic, told me to take a few days off, recover from the trauma, but I knew I wouldn't. Sitting still meant thinking, and thinking meant remembering the locked door, the hiss of propane, the crack of gunfire. I needed to keep moving, needed the rhythm of the road to drown out the memories. That night, I parked at a busy truck stop, nose out, engine idling. I kept the curtains open, watching the lot, waiting for a dark pickup or a familiar face to emerge from the shadows. Sleep came in fits, and when it did, I dreamed of ice and fire, of locked doors and men who disappeared into storms. And I knew, with the certainty that settled into my bones, that this wasn't over. Not really. Men like Ephraim didn't just vanish. They regrouped, they planned, and they came back. The first week after the incident, I convinced myself I was being paranoid. Every dark pickup in my mirrors was just another vehicle on the highway. Every stranger at a fuel stop was just a driver getting coffee. Every time my phone rang with an unknown number, it was just a wrong number or a telemarketer. I took loads that kept me moving, short hauls that didn't require overnight stops, routes that stayed on major interstates where there were witnesses and cameras. I told myself it was temporary, that once the authorities made arrests, once Ephraim and his crew were locked up, I could go back to normal. But normal felt like something from another lifetime. The second week, I started noticing patterns. A beige sedan that appeared behind me on 3 different routes, always keeping just far enough back to avoid being obvious. A man in a truck stop in Wisconsin who watched me a little too long, his eyes following me from the fuel island to the building and back. Small things, easily dismissed individually, but they accumulated like ice on a windshield, building up until I couldn't see clearly anymore. I called the investigator, the steel-haired woman who'd interviewed me at the clinic. She listened patiently, then told me they were still building the case, that they had leads but no arrests yet. "Mr. Brackenridge," she said, her voice carrying a note of professional sympathy that made my stomach turn. "We're doing everything we can. But these operations, they're like networks. You cut one thread and they just reroute. It takes time. Time. The word hung there like a sentence. How much time did I have before the sedan got closer, before the watching man became an acting man? I thanked her and hung up, sitting in my idling truck in a rest area outside of Eau Claire, watching the traffic flow past and wondering which vehicles were innocent and which were hunting me. The third week, I made a mistake. I accepted a load going back to the Iron Range, a rush delivery of mining equipment to a site outside of Virginia, Minnesota. The money was good, triple the normal rate for the expedited timeline, and I needed it. The incident had cost me work, the trauma had cost me sleep, and my savings were evaporating. But more than that, I think part of me needed to prove that I wasn't scared, that Ephraim Lindholm and his vanished crew hadn't broken something fundamental in me. So I took the load, signed the paperwork, and headed north. The weather was clear, the roads dry. It should have been an easy run, but the moment I crossed into the Iron Range, I felt it, that same prickle at the base of my skull that I'd felt in the bunkhouse, the animal awareness that predators were near. I pushed through, made the delivery without incident, and was heading back south when my phone rang. It was Ingrid Soderquist, the nurse from the clinic. "Luther," she said, and I could hear the tension in her voice, "you need to be careful, very careful." "What's wrong?" I asked, my hands tightening on the wheel. There was a pause, and I heard what sounded like a door closing. When she spoke again, her voice was lower. "A man came to the clinic today, asked about you, wanted to know if you'd been back, if you'd said anything else about that night. I told him I hadn't seen you, but Luther, he didn't believe me. I could see it in his eyes." My blood ran cold. "What did he look like?" She described him, and my worst fear was confirmed. Marcus, the lean-faced, silent one from Ephraim's crew, he was hunting me, and he wasn't being subtle about it. "Did he threaten you?" I asked. Ingrid hesitated. "Not directly, but he left his number, said if you contacted me, I should tell you to call him, that there were things that needed to be discussed." She paused. "Luther, I'm scared. Not just for you. These men, they know where I work. They know I helped you." The guilt hit me like a fist. By escaping, by surviving, I'd pulled Ingrid into the crosshairs. "I'm sorry," I said, the words inadequate. "I never meant for you to be involved." "I know," she said quietly, "but I am involved now. We both are." She gave me the number Marcus had left, and I wrote it down on a scrap of paper, my hand shaking. "What are you going to do?" she asked. I didn't know. Every option felt like a trap. If I called, I'd be confirming I was scared, that I could be pressured. If I didn't, Marcus would escalate, and Ingrid would pay the price. "I'll figure something out," I said, though I had no idea what that something might be. "In the meantime, you should tell the police. File a report." She laughed, a bitter sound. "And say what? A man came to my workplace and asked questions? They can't do anything unless he makes a direct threat, and men like him are too smart for that." She was right, and we both knew it. We ended the call, and I sat there on the shoulder of the highway, engine idling, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. The paper with Marcus's number felt like it was burning a hole in my pocket. I pulled it out, stared at the digits, and made a decision that I knew I'd probably regret. I dialed the number. It rang 3 times before a voice answered, that same low rasp I remembered from the bunkhouse. "Brackenridge." It wasn't a question. "Yeah?" I said. "It's me." There was a sound that might have been a chuckle. "Took you long enough. Thought maybe you were smarter than this, staying hidden. But here you are, predictable as sunrise." I forced myself to stay calm. "What do you want, Marcus?" Another pause. "It's not what I want. It's what you owe. You cost Ephraim a lot that night. Equipment, product, a perfectly good operation. Now, he's a reasonable man. He understands things happen, but he needs compensation." "I don't owe him anything," I said. anger flaring. He locked us up. He shot at us. I did what I had to do to survive. Marcus's voice hardened. You blew up his property. You called the cops. You made him a fugitive. That's got a price, Brackenridge, and you're going to pay it. I could feel the trap closing. What kind of price? I asked, dreading the answer. Simple, Marcus said. You make a run for us. One delivery, no questions asked. You do it quiet, you do it clean, and we call it square. You refuse, well, that nurse at the clinic, she seems like a nice lady. Be a shame if something happened to her. The threat was explicit now, out in the open. I wanted to tell him to go to hell, to say I'd go straight to the police with this recording, but I knew it wouldn't matter. Men like Marcus operated in the spaces between laws, and they knew exactly how far they could push before crossing lines that would bring real consequences. What's the delivery? I asked, hating myself for even considering it. Details later, Marcus said. You'll get a call in the next few days with a pickup location and a drop point. You follow instructions, you keep your mouth shut, and everyone walks away happy. And if I refuse? The question was rhetorical, we both knew it. Marcus's answer confirmed it. Then you spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder, wondering when will come for you. Or for people you care about. Your choice, Brackenridge. But choose smart. The line went dead, and I sat there with the phone pressed to my ear, listening to silence. I'd been backed into a corner, forced to choose between my freedom and the safety of an innocent woman who'd done nothing but help me. It was a choice that wasn't really a choice at all. I drove for hours, not really seeing the road, my mind churning through options. I could go to the police, but what would I tell them? That I'd received a vague threat about making a delivery. They'd file a report, maybe increase patrols near the clinic, but they couldn't protect Ingrid around the clock. And if Marcus and Ephraim were determined, they'd find a moment, a gap in the coverage. I could run, disappear into the vast network of highways and truck stops, change my name and start over. But that would leave Ingrid exposed, and I couldn't live with that blood on my hands. Or I could do what they asked. Make the delivery, whatever it was, and hope they kept their word. It was the option that made my skin crawl, that felt like betraying everything I believed in. But it was also the option that might keep everyone alive. I pulled into a truck stop outside of Minneapolis and sat in the lot, watching the sun set and the lights come on. Other drivers moved around me, going about their routines, oblivious to the war being waged in my head. I envied them their ignorance, their simple problems of traffic and deadlines. My phone rang again, 3 days later. I was hauling a load of auto parts to Fargo, trying to keep my mind occupied with the mechanics of driving. The number was different, but I knew who it would be before I answered. Brackenridge, I said, not bothering with pleasantries. A new voice, not Marcus this time, but one I recognized, Ephraim Lindholm. Luther, he said, his tone almost friendly. I appreciate you being reasonable about this. Shows character. Get to the point, I said through gritted teeth. Ephraim chuckled. Always were direct. I respect that. Here's the situation. You're going to pick up a trailer tomorrow night, 10 p.m., at a truck yard outside of Cloquet. Take it to a warehouse in Thunder Bay. Simple border crossing, nothing fancy. You deliver it, you walk away, and we never bother you or your nurse friend again. A border crossing. That meant customs, inspections, potential federal charges if things went wrong. What's in the trailer? I asked, though I knew he wouldn't tell me. Does it matter? Ephraim replied, echoing the same question from that first night. You're hauling freight, that's what you do. Just this time you're doing it for us. I wanted to refuse, wanted to tell him to find another patsy. But then I thought about Ingrid, about her kind eyes and the way she'd helped us without hesitation. "I want proof," I said. "Proof that Ingrid is safe." Ephraim was quiet for a moment. "Fair enough. Marcus will send you a photo in the next hour. She's fine for now, but Luther, if you deviate from the plan, if you contact the authorities, if you do anything except exactly what we tell you, she won't stay fine. Understand?" "I understand," I said, the words tasting like ash. "Good man," Ephraim said. "Details will come via text. Follow them precisely." The line went dead, and I was alone again with the hum of the road and the weight of what I'd agreed to. An hour later, my phone buzzed with an image. It was Ingrid, standing outside the clinic, taken from a distance but close enough to be clear. She looked worried, her eyes scanning the parking lot like she sensed she was being watched. The message was clear. They could get to her any time they wanted. The next day and a half were a blur. I completed the Fargo delivery, then deadheaded back toward Duluth, my mind obsessively running through every detail of the plan Ephraim had sent. The truck yard in Cloquet was off the main routes, a small operation that probably did more in questionable deals than legitimate business. I was to arrive at 10 p.m., hook up to a specific trailer, already loaded and sealed, and drive straight through to Thunder Bay. The border crossing would be at International Falls, where they had contacts who would expedite my passage. It was organized, professional, and utterly illegal. I thought about calling the investigator, about setting up a sting operation that could catch Ephraim and his crew in the act. But every time I reached for the phone, I saw Ingrid's face, saw the fear in her eyes in that photo. The risk was too high, the variables too many. If anything went wrong, if the authorities moved too soon or too late, she'd pay the price. So I kept my mouth shut and drove toward Cloquet, each mile feeling like I was digging myself deeper into a hole I'd never climb out of. The truck yard was exactly as described, a fenced lot with a small office and rows of trailers in various states of repair. I pulled in at 9:55 p.m., 5 minutes early, and immediately spotted the trailer Ephraim had specified. It was a standard dry van, unremarkable except for a small red mark on the rear door, the identifier I'd been told to look for. I backed up to it, hooked my airlines, and connected the electrical. The trailer was heavy. I could feel it in the way the truck settled when I engaged the fifth wheel. Whatever was inside, there was a lot of it. As I finished the hookup, a figure emerged from the office. Dale, the nervous one from the bunkhouse. He approached my window, and I rolled it down. "You're good to go," he said, his voice tight. "No stops except for fuel. You cross at International Falls. Use the commercial lane. Guy named Paulson will be on duty. He'll wave you through. Any problems, you call this number." He handed me a slip of paper with a phone number scrawled on it. "Don't screw this up, Brackenridge. A lot of people are counting on you." I took the paper without a word and rolled up the window. Dale stepped back, and I put the truck in gear, rolling out of the yard and onto the highway. The weight of the trailer pulled at me, a physical reminder of the choice I'd made, the line I'd crossed. I drove north, through the darkness, watching the mile markers tick by. My CB was silent. I turned it off, not wanting to hear the friendly chatter of other drivers going about their honest work. I was alone with my thoughts, and they were dark company. The drive to International Falls took 4 hours, and with each passing mile my anxiety ratcheted higher. I'd never crossed the border with illegal cargo, never been part of something like this. The weight of it pressed down on me, heavier than any load I'd ever hauled. When I finally reached the crossing, just before 3 a.m., my hands were slick with sweat despite the cold. I pulled into the commercial lane, as instructed, and waited for the customs officer to approach. The officer was young, maybe 30, with a nameplate that read Paulson, Ephraim's contact. He glanced at my paperwork, a manifest that I knew was falsified, listing the cargo as industrial equipment. He barely looked at it before handing it back. "Pop the trailer," he said, his voice casual. I did, hearing the mechanism release. He walked around to the back, and I watched in the mirror, holding my breath. He opened the doors, shined his flashlight inside for maybe 5 seconds, then closed them again. He returned to my window. "You're clear. Drive safe." That was it. No inspection, no questions, no secondary screening. I'd just crossed an international border with unknown illegal cargo, and it had been easier than getting through a way station. I pulled forward, back into the flow of traffic, and continued toward Thunder Bay. The warehouse was on the industrial outskirts, another anonymous building in a district full of them. I backed up to the dock at 4:30 a.m., and before I could even set the brakes, people were swarming the trailer, unhitching it with practiced efficiency. A man I didn't recognize approached my window, handed me an envelope, and said, "We're square. You can go." I took the envelope, feeling its weight. Probably cash as a final payment, or maybe just a way to further implicate me. I didn't open it. I just put the truck in gear and drove away, leaving the trailer and whatever it contained behind. I crossed back into the United States at dawn, this time through a different crossing where I knew the inspection would be thorough. My empty trailer was searched, my paperwork scrutinized, and I was delayed for 2 hours. But I was clean, and eventually they waved me through. I drove straight to Duluth, my mind numb, my body running on autopilot. I'd done it. I'd completed Ephraim's delivery, transported illegal cargo across international lines, and become exactly the kind of criminal I'd always despised. But Ingrid was safe, or so I told myself. I called her as soon as I had signal, and she answered on the second ring. "Luther?" Her voice was shaky. "Are you okay?" I wanted to tell her everything, to confess what I'd done and why, but I couldn't. "I'm fine," I said. "Has anyone bothered you? Any more visits?" "No," she said. "It's been quiet. Luther, what's going on?" I closed my eyes, fighting the urge to break down. "It's over," I lied. "They're leaving us alone. It's over." We talked for a few more minutes, her relief palpable even through the phone. When we hung up, I sat in my truck in a rest area and finally opened the envelope. $10,000 in cash, and a note in Ephraim's handwriting. "Pleasure doing business. Don't make us come back." I burned the note in a trash can and stashed the cash in my sleeper. Blood money, that's what it was. Payment for my soul. I tried to go back to work, to resume the rhythm of the road, but nothing felt the same. Every load felt suspicious. Every instruction from dispatch like it might be another trap. I started refusing runs to the Iron Range, to the border, to anywhere that might bring me back into Ephraim's orbit. My dispatcher noticed, started asking questions I couldn't answer. Weeks passed, then months. I heard through the grapevine that there'd been arrests. Some of Ephraim's network rolled up in a joint task force operation. But the man himself remained a ghost, along with Marcus and Dale. The investigator called once to tell me they'd recovered some of the stolen equipment, that they were building cases against the lower-level operators. But the ones who mattered, the ones who'd threatened me and Ingrid, they were still out there. I thought about quitting, about walking away from trucking entirely. But it was all I knew, and starting over at my age with my skill set felt impossible. So I kept driving, kept watching my mirrors, kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, because deep down I knew that Ephraim's note was a lie. It wasn't over. Men like him don't just walk away. They wait, they plan, and when you finally convinced yourself you're safe, that's when they strike. I changed my routes, my patterns, everything I could control. I never stayed in the same truck stop twice in a row. I varied my fuel stops, my rest breaks, my communication patterns. I became a ghost on the highway, just another anonymous trucker in a sea of them. But the paranoia never left. Every dark vehicle was a threat. Every stranger was a potential assassin. Every phone call might be the one telling me they were done waiting. And the worst part, the part that keeps me awake in the small hours of the morning, is knowing that I'd do it all again. If they came back, if they threatened Ingrid or anyone else I cared about, I'd cross that line again. Because that's what they'd learned about me. What they'd proven in that ice storm on the Iron Range. I had a breaking point, and they knew exactly where it was. The last time I drove Route 53, about 6 months after the incident, I slowed as I passed the turnoff to that work site. The access road was overgrown, the floodlights dark, the buildings probably stripped and abandoned. But I could still see it all clearly in my mind. The locked bunkhouse, the hiss of propane, the flash of Ephraim's gun. And I knew that somewhere out there, Ephraim Lindholm was watching, waiting, remembering. I don't haul through the Iron Range anymore. I take the long way around, even if it costs me time and money. Because some roads, once you've traveled them, mark you in ways that never wash off. And some debts, no matter how much you pay, never really get settled. They just wait, accruing interest, until the collectors come back around. I'm still driving, still hauling freight across the northern routes, though never the ones I used to run. Still checking my mirrors, still sleeping with one eye open, still waiting for the knock on my door that I know will eventually come. Because, in the end, Ephraim was right about one thing. You can't escape the Iron Range. It gets into your blood, into your bones, and once it has you, it never really lets go. The ice melted, the roads cleared, but the storm, the real storm, the one that started that night in the freezing rain, it's still raging, and I'm still caught in it, driving blind, hoping I can stay ahead of the whiteout just a little bit longer. The Badlands in winter are a study in deception. From a distance, they look peaceful, almost serene, the layered rock formations dusted with snow like some kind of postcard. But get close enough, stand on the edge where the wind comes tearing across the open prairie, and you understand why the Lakota called this place Makosika, the Badlands. It's a place that doesn't forgive mistakes, doesn't offer second chances. And on the night of January 14th, 2020, when the blizzard warnings started scrolling across my weather app like apocalyptic scripture, I should have known better than to push through. Should have found a hotel in Rapid City and waited it out. But hindsight's a luxury you only get after you've survived. My name is Hobart McKeever, though most folks just call me Hob. I've been running freight for 26 years, started when I was 21 and never looked back. The road's been good to me, mostly. Paid for a house I barely see, put 2 kids through college, and given me enough stories to fill a book I'll never write. I specialize in the northern routes, the ones that cross the Dakotas and Montana, the stretches where you can drive for hours without seeing anything but sky and grass and the occasional pronghorn watching you pass. It's lonely work, but I prefer it that way. Less traffic means fewer idiots trying to kill you with their driving. The load that night was routine. Farm equipment parts heading from Sioux Falls to Billings. Nothing unusual, nothing that raised any red flags when I signed the paperwork. The dispatcher had mentioned the weather, told me there was a system moving in from the northwest, but the forecast had it arriving around midnight. I'd be through the Badlands and into Wyoming long before then, or so the plan went. I loaded up around 2 p.m., did my inspection with the kind of thoroughness that comes from 2 decades of experience, and rolled out by 3. The sky was clear, the roads dry. It felt like an easy run. I made good time through the eastern part of South Dakota, the flatlands where you can see your exit from 20 miles away. The sun was setting as I hit the Missouri River crossing at Chamberlain, painting the water in shades of orange and red that would have been beautiful if I'd had time to appreciate them. But I was watching the sky to the west, watching the clouds building on the horizon like a wall. They were darker than the forecast had suggested, and they were moving faster. I keyed the CB, looking for local input. Westbound on 90. Anyone got eyes on this system coming in? Static, then a voice, older, weathered. It's moving quick, supposed to be light snow, but it's looking meaner than that. You might want to find a place to park. I considered it, but I was already past Chamberlain, and the next real town was Wall, a good 70 miles west. I could make Wall before the worst hit, or at least that's what I told myself. "Appreciate it," I said into the CB. "I'll keep an eye on it." The voice came back, skeptical. "Your funeral, friend." Then silence. The temperature started dropping around 7 p.m., falling from the mid-20s down to single digits in less than an hour. I could feel it in the way the truck responded, the engine working harder, the fuel flowing different. And then the wind picked up, not gradually but all at once, like someone had opened a door in the sky. It slammed into the trailer broadside, pushing the whole rig sideways. I corrected, both hands on the wheel, and dropped my speed from 70 to 60, then 50. The first snowflakes appeared, not falling so much as flying horizontally, driven by wind that had to be gusting 50, 60 miles per hour. Within 10 minutes, visibility went from clear to maybe a quarter mile. Within 20, it was down to 100 feet. I activated my hazards, watching the road markers disappear into the white. This was bad, worse than I'd expected, worse than the forecast had predicted. I should have stopped, should have pulled into the emergency lane and waited it out. But there was nothing out here, no services, no shelter, just open prairie and the distant promise of Wall. So I kept going, crawling along at 30 miles per hour, every muscle in my body tense. That's when I saw the reflectors. Not the normal road markers, but emergency triangles. The kind you put out when you're broken down. They were spaced along the shoulder, faint orange glows in the swirling snow. I slowed even further, air brakes hissing and swept my headlights across the scene. A truck, a big rig like mine, was pulled halfway onto the shoulder, its hazard lights barely visible through the accumulation on the lens. The trailer was jackknifed slightly, not a full disaster, but enough to block part of the right lane. I stopped about 50 yards back and set my own flashers, then grabbed my heavy coat and flashlight. The wind hit me the moment I opened the door, a physical force that nearly knocked me off the step. I caught myself on the grab handle and climbed down, boots immediately slipping on the ice underneath the snow. The cold was vicious, the kind that finds every gap in your clothing and exploits it. I made my way toward the truck using my flashlight to cut through the white. The truck was a Freightliner, older model, maybe 15 years old, but well-maintained from what I could see. The driver's door was closed, windows dark. I approached from the side and knocked on the door, hard enough to be heard over the wind. "Hey, you all right in there?" No response. I tried the handle and found it locked. I moved to the passenger side, same result. The truck was sealed up tight, but there were no signs of life inside. No condensation on the windows, no glow from a dome light or phone screen. It was like a ghost ship. I circled around to the back of the trailer, fighting the wind with every step. The doors were closed but not sealed, the padlock hanging open on its hasp. That was wrong. You don't leave a loaded trailer unsecured, not out here where anyone could come along. I pulled the doors open, my flashlight beam cutting into the darkness inside. Empty. The trailer was completely empty. No cargo, No straps, nothing. Just bare metal walls and a floor marked with the tracks of a pallet jack. A trailer doesn't just empty itself in the middle of a blizzard on I-90. Someone had offloaded this cargo, or it had never been loaded in the first place. I closed the doors and moved back toward the cab, my mind working through possibilities. Hijacking seemed unlikely, out here in the middle of nowhere. Mechanical failure wouldn't explain the empty trailer. And where was the driver? The truck's engine was cold. I'd touched the hood, which meant it had been here for hours, maybe since before the storm hit. I climbed up onto the step and peered through the driver's side window, using my flashlight to illuminate the interior. The cab was clean, almost obsessively so. No trash, no coffee cups, no personal items scattered on the dash. The logbook was missing from its usual spot, and the CB radio had been removed, leaving just empty wires. This wasn't a breakdown. This was a scene, carefully staged, deliberately abandoned. I dropped back down and returned to my truck, my mind racing. This needed to be reported, but my phone had no signal, and the CB radio's range was limited in weather like this. I could try to raise someone, but the odds of getting through were slim. The smart move was to keep driving, put distance between me and whatever this was, and report it when I reached Wall. But something about the whole setup bothered me, nagged at the edge of my awareness like a splinter I couldn't quite reach. I climbed back into my cab and sat there, engine idling, watching the abandoned truck through the swirling snow. That's when I noticed it. A faint glow coming from underneath the trailer. Not headlights, not emergency lights, but something else. A yellowish glow that pulsed slightly, like it was being powered by a generator or battery. I grabbed my flashlight again and stepped back out into the storm, this time heading straight for that glow. Underneath the trailer, tucked up against the axles where you wouldn't see it unless you were looking, was a battery-powered work light. It was positioned to illuminate something mounted to the trailer's undercarriage. I got down on my knees, ignoring the snow soaking through my jeans, and aimed my flashlight at the object. It was a metal box, about the size of a briefcase, secured with industrial zip ties. There were no markings on it, no labels, just smooth black metal with a small LED on one corner blinking red. Every instinct I had screamed at me to get away from that truck, to get back in my cab and drive until this whole scene was miles behind me. But I couldn't stop staring at that blinking LED, couldn't stop my mind from cataloging all the ways this was wrong. The empty trailer, the missing logbook and radio, the carefully positioned light, the unmarked box. This wasn't random, this was deliberate. And whatever was in that box, someone had gone to a lot of trouble to hide it here. I was reaching for my knife, thinking I'd cut the zip ties and take the box with me, when I heard it. A vehicle approaching from the west, engine noise cutting through the wind. I stood quickly, pocketing the knife, and moved away from the trailer. Headlights appeared through the snow, not the high beams of another semi, but the lower, wider spread of a pickup or SUV. The vehicle slowed as it approached, and I could make out a light bar on the roof. DOT or Highway Patrol, maybe. Help, or at least someone official I could report this to. The vehicle stopped about 20 feet from the abandoned truck, and a figure climbed out. He was tall, wearing a heavy coat with reflective striping and a DOT logo on the sleeve. He had a flashlight in one hand and moved with the careful, measured steps of someone who'd worked in conditions like this before. He spotted me and changed direction, approaching with his light raised but not aimed directly at me. "You the one who called this in?" he shouted over the wind. I shook my head. Didn't call anything, no signal, just stopped to check on it. He nodded, sweeping his light over the abandoned truck. "How long's it been here?" I shrugged. "Engine's cold, hours at least." He moved past me toward the truck, and I got a better look at him. Older, maybe late 50s, with a weathered face and the kind of eyes that had seen too many accidents, too many bad outcomes. "You check inside?" he asked. "Locked up tight," I said. "No one inside that I could see. Trailer's empty." He glanced at me, something flickering in his expression. "You check the trailer?" There was an edge to the question, a weight that made me hesitate. "Yeah," I said carefully. "Doors were open. No cargo." He grunted and moved to examine the doors himself, pulling them wide and shining his light inside. He spent longer looking than I had, his beam tracking across the floor, the walls, the ceiling. When he turned back to me, his expression was neutral, professional. "I'm Eldred Haugen, DOT snowplow operator. Got a call about a possible stranded vehicle out here." I introduced myself, and we shook hands, his grip strong despite the cold. "You see anybody else around? Any other vehicles?" I shook my head. "Just the truck and then you." Eldred looked out into the storm, his jaw working like he was chewing on something unpleasant. "Storm's getting worse," he said finally. "You should get moving. Wall's about 40 miles west. Roads are still passable, but that won't last." I nodded, ready to take the advice. But then I thought about the box under the trailer, about that blinking red LED. "What about the truck? You gonna call it in, get a wrecker out here?" Eldred turned back to the abandoned rig, his expression unreadable. "I'll handle it. You just worry about getting yourself somewhere safe." There was something dismissive in his tone, something that felt like a door closing. I wanted to press, wanted to ask about the box, about what he thought had happened here. But the wind was howling, and the snow was coming down so thick I could barely see my own truck. I nodded and started to walk away, then stopped. "That box under the trailer," I said, turning back. "You know what that is?" Eldred went very still. His hand, which had been hanging loose at his side, moved slightly toward his belt. "What box?" "Under the trailer," I repeated. "Mounted to the axle. Black metal, about this big." I held my hands apart to show the size. Eldred's eyes narrowed. "You didn't touch it, did you?" There was something in his voice now, urgency mixed with warning. I shook my head, just saw it, thought it was weird. He took a step toward me, closing the distance. "Listen to me carefully. You didn't see anything under that trailer. You didn't see a box, you didn't see a light, you didn't see nothing. You understand?" The threat was implicit but clear. I felt my pulse quicken, felt the cold turn from uncomfortable to dangerous. This wasn't a DOT worker checking on a stranded vehicle. This was something else, something connected to whatever operation the abandoned truck was part of. "I understand," I said slowly. Eldred studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "Good, now get out of here, and forget you ever stopped." I didn't need to be told twice. I turned and walked as quickly as the ice would allow back to my truck, feeling Eldred's eyes on me the entire way. I climbed into the cab, engaged the locks, and put the truck in gear. As I pulled away, I glanced in the mirror and saw Eldred still standing there watching me go. Then the snow swallowed him up, and I was alone on the highway again, the abandoned truck and whatever secrets it held disappearing into the white behind me. But I couldn't shake the image of that box, or the way Eldred had reacted when I mentioned it. And as I drove toward Wall, fighting the worsening storm, I realized that I'd stumbled into something I didn't understand. Something dangerous enough that a man posing as a DOT worker was willing to threaten me over it. The smart thing would be to forget it, to do exactly what Eldred had said and pretend I'd never stopped. But 26 years on the road had taught me that sometimes the smart thing and the right thing aren't the same. And I had a feeling that before this night was over, I'd have to choose between them. The 40 miles to Wall felt like 400. The storm had intensified to the point where I could barely see the hood ornament on my own truck, let alone the road ahead. I was navigating by feel more than sight, using the subtle vibration of the rumble strips to tell me when I was drifting too far right, the absence of any resistance when I started crossing the center line. My speed had dropped to 15 miles per hour, maybe 20 on the straightaways where I could risk it. The whole time, my mind kept circling back to that abandoned truck, to the box underneath, to the way Eldred Haugen's hand had moved toward his belt when I'd mentioned it. A man doesn't threaten you over nothing, and a dot worker doesn't just happen to show up at an abandoned vehicle in the middle of a blizzard unless he's expecting to find it there. The whole scene had been staged. I was certain of that now. The question was why? What was in that box that was worth all the setup, all the risk? And more importantly, how many people were involved in whatever this operation was? I tried the CB again, hoping to raise someone, anyone who might have information. Westbound on 90. Anyone got ears on? Looking for information about that abandoned rig east of Wall. Static. I adjusted the squelch and tried again. This is westbound. Mile marker 138. Looking for any traffic information. More static. Then a burst of interference that sounded almost like words but dissolved before I could make sense of it. The storm was playing hell with the signal, or someone was jamming it. Out here, either was possible. My phone buzzed, and I glanced at it, surprised to see a single bar of signal. A text message from an unknown number. Keep driving. Don't stop in Wall. Continue to Rapid City. I stared at the screen, my blood running cold. Someone knew where I was, knew what I'd seen, and was tracking me. I set the phone down and checked my mirrors, looking for headlights for any sign I was being followed. But the storm made it impossible to see more than a few feet behind me. I could have had a convoy back there, and I wouldn't have known until they were right on top of me. Wall appeared out of the white like a mirage, a handful of lights that marked the truck stop and the few businesses that served highway traffic. I'd been planning to stop, to get inside where it was warm, maybe grab some coffee and wait out the worst of the storm. But that text message changed everything. If I stopped, whoever was watching would know I hadn't followed their instructions. And given Eldred's reaction back at the abandoned truck, I had no illusions about what that might mean. But I also couldn't keep driving blind into a blizzard. The smart play was to pull off, find a public place with witnesses and security cameras, and figure out my next move. I signaled for the exit, my turn barely registering in the accumulating snow, and eased down the ramp. The truck stop was ahead, its sign glowing warm and inviting through the storm. I pulled into the lot and found a spot near the building, backing in so I had a clear view of the entrance and the fuel islands. The moment I set the brakes, my phone rang. Not a text this time, a call. The number was different from the text, but still unknown. I let it ring twice, 3 times, debating whether to answer. On the 4th ring, I picked up. Yeah, a voice, female, professional, with an accent I couldn't quite place. Mr. McKeever, you were told not to stop in Wall. So they knew my name. That narrowed down who was tracking me, or at least confirmed they had access to information they shouldn't have. Storm's too bad, I said, trying to keep my voice level. I'm not driving blind into the Badlands. There was a pause, and I could hear what sounded like keyboard clicks in the background. Your safety is noted. However, your presence in Wall complicates things. There are people looking for you, Mr. McKeever. People who don't appreciate curiosity. I gripped the phone tighter. What people? What's this about? Another pause. The less you know, the better. Trust me on that. Now, you have 2 choices. You can continue to Rapid City as instructed, or you can stay in Wall and deal with the consequences. What consequences? I asked. but the line had already gone dead. I sat there, staring at the phone, my mind racing. This was bigger than I'd thought, more organized. They had my number, my name, probably my route and my load information. They'd been tracking me since I stopped at the abandoned truck, maybe even before. And now they were giving me an ultimatum: cooperate or face consequences I could only imagine. I climbed down from the cab and hurried into the truck stop, the wind trying to rip the door from my hands. Inside, the warmth hit me like a physical force, and I stood there for a moment, letting my body adjust. The place was maybe half full, drivers scattered among the tables and booths, nursing coffee and waiting for the storm to break. A few glanced up as I entered, but most were too absorbed in their own concerns to pay me any attention. I grabbed coffee from the self-serve station and found a booth near the back where I could watch both the entrance and the parking lot through the windows. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my phone again, this time to do what I should have done from the start: call the police. I dialed 911 and the call connected after 3 rings. 911, what's your emergency? The dispatcher's voice was calm, trained. I'm a trucker on I-90 near Wall. I found an abandoned vehicle about 40 miles east, and there's something suspicious going on. There was a box hidden under the trailer, and a man claiming to be DOT threatened me when I mentioned it. There was a pause, longer than I expected. Can you describe the vehicle and the location? I gave her the details, the mile marker, the description of the Freightliner, everything I could remember. Another pause. And you said someone threatened you. I described Eldred, his DOT coat, his vehicle, the way he'd reacted to my mention of the box. The dispatcher was quiet for a moment, then said, "Sir, I'm going to need you to stay where you are. I'm sending a unit to your location. Don't leave the truck stop." "How long?" I asked. "Storm's bad. I don't know how fast they can get here." I could hear her typing. "Officer is about 20 minutes out. Just stay inside, stay visible. Don't approach anyone who asks about the truck." She paused. "Mr. McKeever, this is important. Did you touch the box? Did you move it or open it?" The question sent a chill through me. "No, I just saw it." "Why? What's in it?" But she'd already moved on, telling me again to stay put, to wait for the officer. The call ended, and I was left with more questions than answers. 20 minutes. I could wait 20 minutes. I sipped my coffee and watched the lot, looking for Eldred's vehicle, for anyone who seemed too interested in the trucks parked outside. The storm was still raging, the snow piling up against the windows, but inside the truck stop, everything felt eerily normal. Just drivers waiting out the weather, complaining about dispatch and road conditions, the usual truck stop atmosphere. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that somewhere in this room someone was reporting my every move. 15 minutes passed. Then my phone buzzed again, another text from a different unknown number. "Police won't help you. Leave now or they'll find you like they found the driver." Like they found the driver. The words hit me like a fist. The abandoned truck hadn't just been staged. There had been a driver, and something had happened to them. Something bad enough that whoever sent this message thought it was a credible threat. I stood, leaving my coffee half finished, and moved toward the door. Screw waiting for the police. Screw following instructions from voices on the phone. I needed to get out of Wall, needed to put distance between me and whatever network I'd stumbled into. But as I reached for the door, it swung open, and a woman walked in, shaking snow from her coat. She was maybe 40, with sharp features and eyes that swept the room with professional efficiency before landing on me. "Hobart McKeever?" she asked, though it was clear she already knew. I nodded, wary. She pulled out a badge, showing it just long enough for me to see the South Dakota Highway Patrol seal. "I'm Trooper Vickers, Dispatch said you called in a suspicious vehicle. I glanced past her, looking for a patrol car, but the lot was just a wall of white. Where's your vehicle? I asked. She gestured vaguely toward the lot. Parked out front. Storm's making it hard to see much of anything. Why don't we sit down, and you can walk me through what you found? Something felt wrong. Her arrival was too fast. The dispatcher had said 20 minutes, and it had only been 15. And the way she'd introduced herself, showing the badge but not letting me examine it closely, felt rehearsed. I took a step back. Let me see that badge again. Her expression didn't change, but I saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Annoyance, maybe, or calculation. Mr. McKeever, we're wasting time. I need your statement about the abandoned vehicle. Show me the badge, I repeated, my voice firmer. She reached for her belt, but instead of the badge, her hand came up with something else. A phone. She held it up, showing me the screen. It was a photo of the abandoned truck, but not the one I'd seen. This photo was from before, from when it had a driver, and the driver was slumped over the wheel, head at an angle that no living person could maintain. This is what happens to people who ask too many questions, she said quietly. Now, are we going to have a conversation, or are you going to make this difficult? I didn't answer. I just turned and ran, pushing past her toward the back of the truck stop. There had to be another exit, a back door for deliveries or emergencies. I heard her shout behind me, heard the sound of footsteps, but I didn't look back. I hit the hallway that led to the restrooms and kept going, looking for any door marked exit. There, at the end of the hall, a metal door with a crash bar. I slammed into it and the door flew open, dumping me out into the storm. The cold hit me again, but I didn't stop. I ran along the side of the building, staying close to the wall, trying to orient myself. My truck was on the other side of the lot, maybe 100 yards away. I just had to get there, get the engine started, and get back on the highway. I rounded the corner and saw the lot, saw my truck sitting where I'd left it. And I saw something else, 2 figures standing near it, their shapes barely visible through the snow. I stopped, pressing myself against the wall. One of the figures was tall, wearing a heavy coat. The other was shorter, broader. They were examining my truck, looking in the windows, checking the doors, looking for me. I couldn't get to the truck not without being seen. And even if I could, they were probably smart enough to have disabled it or set up some kind of trap. I was cut off, hunted in the middle of a truck stop parking lot in a blizzard. I turned and moved along the back of the building, looking for options. There were other trucks parked in the lot, dozens of them. If I could get to one that was unlocked, maybe I could hide until the real police arrived. Or maybe I could find a driver willing to help. Someone who'd believe my story and get me out of here. I moved between 2 trailers, using them for cover, and worked my way toward the fuel islands. That's when I heard it. A voice, tinny and distant, coming from one of the trucks, a CB radio. Dispatch, this is Mina. You got any updates on that eastbound situation? A woman's voice, calm and professional. Dispatch. This was a working truck, and the driver was on the radio. I moved to the cab and tapped on the window. A face appeared, older woman with gray hair pulled back in a ponytail. She looked at me, confused, and cracked the window an inch. Help, I said, keeping my voice low. I need help. There are people after me. She studied me for a moment, her expression skeptical. You in some kind of trouble? I nodded. I found something I shouldn't have. They're trying to silence me, please. I just need to get out of here. She looked past me, scanning the lot, then made a decision. Get in the passenger side. Quick. I didn't need to be told twice. I circled around the cab and climbed in, the warmth and relative safety of the enclosed space almost overwhelming. The woman was watching me, her hand near the CB mic. I'm Minna Kittleson, radio dispatcher for a freight company out of Pierre. I park here between shifts. Now, you want to tell me what's really going on?" I started to explain, the words tumbling out. The abandoned truck, the box, Eldred's threat, the phone calls, the woman posing as a trooper. Minna listened without interruption, her expression growing more serious with each detail. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she picked up her CB mic and keyed it. "This is Minna to any law enforcement on frequency. I have a situation at the Wall truck stop, requesting immediate assistance." She released the key and waited. Static. She tried again, on a different channel. Same result. She set the mic down and looked at me. "Someone's jamming the frequencies. That's not something amateurs do." "What do I do?" I asked, feeling the walls closing in. Minna thought for a moment, then started her engine. "You're going to lay low in my sleeper. I'm going to drive us out of here casual-like. Once we're clear and have cell signal, we call this improper to someone we can verify." It was a plan, simple but solid. I climbed into the sleeper berth, a cramped space behind the seats, and pulled a blanket over myself. I heard Minna put the truck in gear, felt the motion as we pulled out of the parking spot. We were maybe 300 yards down the frontage road when I heard her curse. "What?" I called from the sleeper. "Roadblock," she said. "2 vehicles blocking the ramp, DOT markings." My heart sank. They'd anticipated this, had people positioned to cut off escape routes. "What do we do?" Minna didn't answer immediately. Then I felt the truck slow, stop. I heard a window roll down, heard a male voice. "Road's closed ahead, storm's too dangerous. Need everyone to turn back." "I've driven worse than this," Minna said, her tone professional but firm. "I've got a schedule to keep." The voice hardened. "Road's closed, ma'am. Turn it around." There was a pause, then Minna's voice, lower. "You're not DOT. DOT doesn't block roads with unmarked trucks." I heard movement, the sound of a door opening. Minna cursed again, and I heard her shout, "Hobart, run!" I threw off the blanket and scrambled out of the sleeper just as the passenger door was yanked open. A man stood there, the same man I'd seen by my truck. Up close, I could see the cold calculation in his eyes, the kind of eyes that had done this before. I didn't think. I just kicked, catching him in the chest. He stumbled back and I launched myself out of the cab, hitting the ground hard and rolling. The snow cushioned my fall, and I was on my feet and running before he could recover. Behind me, I heard Minna's engine roar, heard the squeal of tires on ice. She was ramming the roadblock, trying to create an opening. Metal crunched, and I glanced back to see her truck pushing through, one of the blocking vehicles sliding sideways. Then I was into the storm again, the white swallowing everything, and I ran blind, just trying to put distance between me and the voices shouting behind me. Running in a blizzard is like running through a void where every direction looks the same and every step could be your last. The snow had accumulated to mid-calf depth, each stride requiring effort that burned through my energy reserves and faster than I could afford. I had no destination, no plan beyond putting distance between myself and the voices behind me. The wind drove ice crystals into my face like needles, and my lungs burned with each breath of frigid air. I couldn't see more than a few feet ahead, couldn't tell if I was running toward the highway or deeper into the prairie. Behind me, I heard engines starting, the growl of heavy vehicles moving. They were coming after me, and they had the advantage of speed, warmth, and organization. All I had was desperation and the slim hope that the storm would hide me long enough to find help. I veered right, or what I thought was right, and nearly slammed into a fence post. I grabbed it to keep from falling, the frozen metal burning through my gloves. A fence meant property, maybe a ranch or a service road. I followed it, using the posts as guideposts through the white. The fence led me to a gate, and beyond that, the dark shape of a building emerged from the storm. It was small, maybe a utility shed or an equipment shelter, but it had walls and a roof, and that was more than I had. I pushed through the gate and stumbled toward the structure, my legs threatening to give out with each step. The door was unlocked, thank God, and I practically fell inside, slamming it shut behind me. The darkness was absolute, and for a moment, I just stood there, gasping, trying to get my bearings. I fumbled for my phone, using its dim light to illuminate the space. It was a maintenance shed, lined with tools and supplies, fuel cans and coils of rope. A workbench sat against one wall, and in the corner, I spotted what looked like an old CB radio mounted to a charging station. I moved to it, hands shaking from cold and adrenaline, and flipped the power switch. Nothing. The battery was dead or disconnected. I searched the workbench looking for anything useful. A flashlight, barely functional, but better than my phone. A map of the area, marked with service roads and property lines, and underneath a pile of work gloves, a folder. I pulled it out, opening it to find paperwork, manifests, and shipping documents. They were all for the same company, Haugen Transport Services. Eldred's name was on several of them, listed as both driver and operations manager. I scanned the documents quickly, my mind racing to connect the pieces. The manifests showed regular shipments along I-90, always during severe weather events, always with the same notation: special handling required, no inspection. The destinations varied, but they were all to remote locations, industrial sites or warehouses far from main roads, and each manifest had a notation in red ink: insurance claim pending. Insurance fraud. That's what this was. They were staging accidents, abandoning trucks during storms, when investigations would be minimal and evidence would be compromised by weather. The special cargo wasn't cargo at all, or if it was, it had been removed before the trucks were abandoned. Then they'd file insurance claims for lost vehicles and goods, collecting payouts on deliberate losses. The box under the trailer, the blinking LED, it must have been some kind of tracking device or evidence they needed to retrieve before the authorities found the truck. But it was more than just fraud. That photo the fake trooper had shown me, the dead driver, meant they were willing to kill to protect their operation. How many other drivers had stumbled across their staged accidents? How many had been silenced? The thought made my blood run cold. I was a loose end, a witness who'd seen too much, and they wouldn't stop hunting until I was dealt with. I heard engines outside, closer now. They'd followed my tracks or were systematically searching the area. I shoved the folder inside my coat and looked for another way out. There was a back door, partially blocked by equipment, but I could squeeze through. I pushed my way out into the storm and found myself in an open field. No more fences, no more structures, just endless white in every direction. The sound of the engines grew louder, and I saw lights sweeping across the field. I dropped flat in the snow, pressing myself into the drifts, praying the accumulation would hide me. The lights passed over my position once, twice, then moved on. I waited, counting to 60, then slowly raised my head. The vehicles had stopped about 100 yards away, and I could see figures climbing out, flashlights cutting through the darkness. They were organizing a search pattern, spreading out to cover the area. I couldn't stay here. They'd find me eventually. I belly crawled through the snow, moving perpendicular to their search line, trying to put distance between us without being seen. My clothes were soaked through, and I could feel hypothermia starting to set in. My fingers were numb, my thoughts slowing. I needed shelter again, needed warmth, or I wouldn't survive the night regardless of whether they found me. That's when I heard it. cutting through the wind and the shouts of my pursuers. A truck horn, long and low, the universal signal of a big rig. I turned toward the sound and saw headlights on what had to be the highway, maybe 200 yards away. A truck was passing, oblivious to the drama unfolding in the field. It was moving slow, barely crawling through the storm, but it was moving. And where there was one truck, there might be others. I got to my feet and ran, no longer caring about staying hidden. Speed was everything now. I could hear shouts behind me, the search party reacting to my movement, but I didn't look back. I just focused on those headlights, on the promise of the highway and potential help. My legs burned, my lungs screamed, but I kept running, closing the distance one agonizing step at a time. I hit the shoulder of the highway and nearly fell, the sudden transition from field to pavement hidden under the snow. The truck's taillights were ahead, receding into the white. I ran after them, waving my arms, shouting, though I knew the driver couldn't hear me over the storm and the engine noise. The truck was pulling away, and I was losing ground. Desperation gave me one last burst of speed, and I drew close enough to slap my hand against the rear of the trailer. The truck didn't stop. Either the driver didn't feel it, or thought it was just the wind buffeting the trailer. I was about to fall back when I saw it, a ladder on the trailer's rear, the kind used for accessing the roof. Without thinking, I grabbed it and pulled myself up, my frozen fingers barely able to grip the rungs. I climbed until I was on the narrow platform near the trailer's lights, wedged myself into the small space, and held on. The truck continued west, carrying me away from my pursuers, away from the field and the shed and the immediate danger. But I was exposed now, clinging to the back of a moving trailer in sub-zero temperatures and hurricane-force winds. My body was shutting down, the cold seeping into my core despite my efforts to stay conscious. I couldn't feel my hands anymore. Couldn't tell if I was still gripping the ladder or if I was about to fall. The world narrowed to just the effort of holding on, of lasting one more second, one more minute. I don't know how long I clung to that trailer. Time lost meaning, became just a series of moments where I was still alive, still holding on. The storm showed no signs of letting up, and the truck showed no signs of stopping. I tried to move, to improve my position or signal the driver, but my body wouldn't respond. Hypothermia had its hooks in me now, and I could feel myself slipping away. Then the truck slowed. I felt the change in momentum, the gradual deceleration of the engine. Through my blurred vision, I saw lights ahead. A truck stop, bigger than the one in Wall, with rows of rigs and bright fluorescent islands. The truck pulled in, navigating toward the fuel pumps, and I knew this was my chance. As it came to a complete stop, I let go of the ladder and dropped into the snow. I hit hard, my legs collapsing under me, but I was down and I was away from the trailer. I crawled toward the building, every movement requiring concentration and willpower I barely had left. The automatic doors slid open as I reached them, and I fell through into warmth and light. People were shouting, hands were grabbing me, lifting me. I tried to speak, to warn them, to explain, but my mouth wouldn't form the words. Someone wrapped a blanket around me, someone else was calling 911. I was surrounded by concerned faces, by truck drivers and staff who'd seen enough accidents to know hypothermia when they saw it. A paramedic arrived, young guy with steady hands and a calm voice. He checked my vitals, started warming me gradually, asked questions I couldn't answer. Through it all, I kept my hand pressed against my coat, feeling the folder still tucked inside. The evidence, the manifests that showed what Eldred and his network were doing. As long as I had those, I had leverage. I had proof. The police came next, real police this time. I checked their badges carefully, called the station to verify their identities before I'd talk. When I was certain they were legitimate, I told them everything. The abandoned truck, Eldred's threat, the fake trooper, the chase, Minna's help, and the roadblock. And I gave them the folder, the manifest that laid out the insurance fraud operation in black and white. They listened, took notes, made calls. More officers arrived, then state investigators, then someone from the FBI. The truck stop became a command center with law enforcement coordinating responses and issuing alerts. They put out calls for Minna Kittleson, wanting to verify her safety and get her statement. They sent units to the abandoned truck location, though I knew they'd find it cleaned out by now. Eldred and his people would have moved the moment they knew I'd escaped. Hours passed. I was treated for exposure, given warm clothes and hot food, questioned and re-questioned by various agencies. Each time, I told the same story, provided the same details. They seemed to believe me, or at least take me seriously, but I could see the doubt in some eyes. A massive fraud operation working through DOT personnel? It sounded paranoid, like conspiracy theory thinking. But the manifests were real, the documents undeniable. Dawn broke eventually, the storm finally exhausting itself. The first light revealed a landscape transformed, everything buried under feet of snow. The highway was still closed, cleanup crews working to clear the main routes. I sat in the truck stop restaurant, staring out at the white expanse, and waited for news. About Minna, about Eldred, about what came next. A detective sat down across from me, older woman with tired eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. "We found Haugen," she said. Or rather, we found his truck. Abandoned on a service road about 10 miles from Wall. No sign of him or his associates. My stomach sank. "He ran." She nodded. "Looks that way, but we've got the manifest you provided, and we're cross-referencing with insurance claims. This thing's bigger than we thought. Multiple companies involved, drivers we're trying to locate. It's going to take time to unravel." "What about Minna Kittleson?" I asked. The detective's expression softened slightly. "We found her truck at the wall ramp, rammed into one of the blocking vehicles. She wasn't there, but there were signs of a struggle. We've got units searching, and we've issued alerts to all the hospitals and clinics in the region." A struggle, that meant they'd taken her, retaliated for helping me. The guilt hit me like a physical blow. She'd risked everything to help a stranger, and now she was paying the price. "You have to find her," I said, my voice rough with emotion. "She saved my life. If they hurt her because of me," the detective held up a hand, "we're doing everything we can. But Mr. McKeever, I need you to understand something. These people, they're not going to just disappear. They've lost their operation, but they still have resources, connections. Until we have them in custody, you're at risk. We can offer protection, witness security if needed." I shook my head. "I'm not hiding. I'm a trucker. I've got loads to haul, bills to pay. I can't just vanish into protective custody." She studied me for a long moment. "Then you need to be careful, very careful. Watch your back, vary your routes, trust your instincts. These people have already shown they're willing to kill to protect themselves. Don't give them another chance." I nodded, understanding the weight of what she was saying. My life had changed the moment I stopped to check on that abandoned truck. I'd stepped into a world of fraud and murder, and even though I'd survived, even though I'd exposed the operation, the danger wasn't over. Eldred Haugen was still out there, along with the fake trooper and whoever else was part of their network. And they knew who I was, knew what I looked like, knew how to find me. Days turned into weeks. I went back to work, hauling loads across the northern routes, always watching, always waiting. The investigation continued. Arrests were made, lower-level operators who'd been part of the fraud scheme. But the principals, Eldred and his core team remained ghosts. Warrants were issued, alerts distributed, but they'd gone to ground in a way that suggested they'd planned for this eventuality. Minna Kittleson was found 3 weeks after that night, alive but traumatized. They'd held her in an abandoned farmhouse, trying to get information about me, about what I'd told the police. She'd refused to cooperate, and eventually they'd let her go, probably deciding she wasn't worth the risk. We talked once, a brief call where we both struggled to find words for what we'd been through. She thanked me for getting the evidence out, for making their capture a matter of when, not if. I thanked her for saving my life. Then we hung up, two strangers bound by trauma, unlikely to ever speak again. I changed my patterns, my routes, the truck stops I used. I installed additional locks on my cab, a dash cam that recorded continuously, a GPS tracker that shared my location with a trusted contact. I slept lighter, woke at every unusual sound, and avoided isolated rest stops like they were plague zones. The paranoia became routine, another part of the job like checking tire pressure or inspecting brake lines. 6 months after the incident, I was hauling through South Dakota again, a route I couldn't avoid without losing work. I took I-90 West, the same highway where it all started, and as I passed the area where I'd found the abandoned truck, I slowed. There was nothing there now, just empty highway and prairie. The snow long since melted, but I could still see it in my mind. The Freightliner with its hazards flashing, the box underneath with its blinking LED, Eldred Haugen's cold eyes as he warned me to forget what I'd seen. My phone rang, and I glanced at it, seeing an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, almost let it go to voicemail, but something made me pick up. McKeever. Silence on the other end, just the faint sound of breathing. Then a voice, low and familiar. "You should have kept driving that night, Hobart." Eldred, my blood turned to ice. "You destroyed a good operation. Cost a lot of people a lot of money. That's not something we forget." I wanted to hang up, wanted to call the police, but I was frozen, trapped by the voice on the line. "Where are you?" I managed to ask. He chuckled, a sound without humor. "Close enough to see you right now. Close enough to finish what we started." I checked my mirrors, scanning the highway behind me, looking for the distinctive shape of his Diet truck or any vehicle that seemed to be pacing me. There were plenty of trucks on the road, but none that stood out. "The police are looking for you," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Every law enforcement agency in 3 states has your picture. You can't run forever." Another chuckle. "We've been running for 6 months, Hobart. We're good at it. And eventually, the heat dies down, people forget, move on to the next case. But we don't forget, we don't move on. We remember who cost us everything." The line went dead, and I was left staring at the phone, my hands trembling on the wheel. He'd called just to remind me that he was still out there, still watching, still waiting for his moment. It was psychological warfare designed to keep me off balance, to make me make a mistake. And it was working. I pulled off at the next exit, found a busy truck stop with cameras and security, and parked where I could see in all directions. I called the detective, reported the call, gave them the number and the timestamp. They promised to trace it, to increase patrols in the area, all the reassurances that meant nothing if Eldred was determined. I sat in my cab, engine idling, and realized that this was my life now. Always looking over my shoulder, always waiting for the other shoe to drop, always wondering if the next rest stop or the next dark highway would be where they finally caught up with me. The insurance fraud operation was dismantled, millions in fraudulent claims identified and prosecuted. The lower-level participants got jail time, and the investigation expanded to reveal corruption in DOT offices, customs facilities, and law enforcement. It was called one of the largest fraud schemes in the region's history. But Eldred Haugen and his core team remained free, became fugitives whose names appeared on wanted lists, and in occasional news updates when someone thought they'd been spotted. And I kept driving, kept hauling freight across the frozen plains and through the mountain passes, kept watching the mirrors and checking the locks. Because that's what truckers do. We drive, even when the road is dangerous, even when the cargo is uncertain, even when we know something's waiting for us in the next storm. We drive because it's all we know, because stopping means giving in to the fear. But I'll never forget that night in the Badlands. The abandoned truck with its secrets, the box with its blinking LED, the way Eldred's hand moved toward his belt when I asked the wrong question. And I'll never forget the knowledge that somewhere out there, in some forgotten corner of the northern routes, men like Eldred are still running their schemes, still staging their accidents, still silencing the witnesses who get too curious. The storm passed, the roads cleared, the sun came out and melted the evidence. But the danger remained, patient and persistent, waiting for the next blizzard, the next desperate driver who stops to help, the next witness who sees too much. And that's the real horror of it all. Not what happened to me, but what's still happening to others. The endless cycle of fraud and violence hidden beneath the mundane routine of trucking, of insurance claims, of storms that bury secrets along with highways. I drive past that spot sometimes, mile marker 138 on I-90, and I slow down just a little. Not to remember. I can't forget even if I wanted to, but to remind myself why I'm still careful, still vigilant. Because somewhere out there, Eldred Haugen is driving too. And one day, on one dark stretch of highway during one bad storm, our paths will cross again. I don't know what will happen when they do. I don't know if the law will have caught up with him by then, or if I'll be the one who has to make the choice between running and standing my ground. All I know is that the blizzard that started that January night never really ended. It just moved, shifted, became part of the landscape of my life. And every time I see snow in the forecast, every time the wind picks up and the visibility drops, I feel it again, that cold certainty that some storms don't just pass through.